This is Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney.
Donald Trump needs a weak dollar.
Have we achieved a soft landing? Has the Fed kind of done its job?
With Lisa Mateo on markets.
The economic calendar jam-packed today.
And Michael Barr with news.
Fears over a broader regional war in the Middle East.
The best in economics, finance, investment, and international relations. This is Bloomberg Surveillance on Bloomberg Radio.
Good morning, everyone. Tom Keene, Paul Sweeney, Michael Barr, Lisa Mateo. It's a Friday, an eventful Friday. The president off comments at Davos was a packed room. I could see John Farrow in the audience.
Oh, yeah? Okay.
He's there taking notes.
Yep, very good. I feel better that he's there. Lisa Mateo, they had a big week there.
On their way back, traveling today on the Gulfstream. I think Lisa has a Gulfstream.
Very good.
Not sure about that. We say good morning to all of you. And it's about earnings. And here's the earnings surprise. It's over in England. Angelina Rascoway. Burberry has been flat on their back for like 3 years.
Okay.
I mean, see, the moment I mentioned Burberry and it's Lisa Mateo's birthday, she starts nodding her head.
Yeah, she expects something coming from there.
The Burberry scarf, I mean, it says Mateo.
Thank you.
But the answer is Burberry did better than good.
Yeah, stock's up about 12% here, so a nice move on the luxury side of the business. Tom, we're going to chat with Dan Ives this hour, get his thoughts on Apple.
Got to be the interview of the day.
Got to be the interview today. And we got a lot of tech earnings coming up in the next week or two, so we got a preview there from Dan Ives.
We'll focus on Apple and maybe a few other ideas. Palantir, I don't understand. He's like ginormous.
He came out heavy on that one and really bullish, and that's been a good call.
On Washington, lots to talk about here as well. On the dollar, George Saravelos will join us from Deutsche Bank. Looking forward to that. A number of worthies scheduled in the 9 o'clock hour.
You know, I ran into Dan Ives a couple of days ago at a New Jersey eatery. The guy's everywhere.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, he's just everywhere. I mean, and he's as poorly dressed outside of the office as he is when he comes in. Yeah, as egregiously dressed there. So.
There we are. Futures are negative 8. A little bit of a pullback here. Don't know what to make of it. The VIX 15.04. Bloomberg Surveillance. We're brought to you by IBKR. Will U.S. oil production exceed 13.61 million barrels per day for November 2024? Trade your prediction. Ooh. Do that with IBKR Forecast Trader. The yes was recently at 35%. Buy yes or no and earn $1 if you're right. Go to ibkr.com/forecast. All of a sudden, our messages for our good sponsors are going to 2 decimal points.
Oh, okay. All right. We can do that on the Bloomberg terminal.
13.61 million barrels per day. Thank you, IBKR, for commodity analysis. IBKR, one of our major supports. Speaking of that, from the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studios, our Bloomberg Business Flash. Lisa Mateo.
You've got it. There was a record-setting day for the S&P 500 yesterday. In fact, all the major averages ending higher came after President Trump promised to push Saudi Arabia, OPEC, to lower oil prices, also pushed the Federal Reserve to lower rates. But this morning, futures lower. NASDAQ futures, little change, down about 20 points. Dow futures down 52. S&P futures down about 6. We have the 2-year yield at 4.27%, down 1 basis point. The yield on the 10-year, 4.64%, and that is little changed. To currency, the Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index down about 0.4%. Have to point out Japanese yen at 156.21 against the dollar. That's after the BOJ raised its key rate to the highest level in 17 years. We get to the euro, up about 0.6%. The British pound up 0.4%, and Bitcoin up more than 2% at just above 105,000. To earnings, they started coming out just around 7 a.m. as we started the show. Verizon just coming out. Their shares up about 1%. Fourth quarter adjusted EPS beat estimates. Then you have American Express, their shares up basically 0.1%. It does see 2025 revenue growth of 8 to 10%. And it wasn't disappointing after the bell earnings from Texas Instruments yesterday. Reported sluggish demand for its computer chips. Texas Instruments down about 3%. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and Tom.
You notice Lisa's not speaking that clearly? I think it's a birthday mimosa.
Yeah, well, you can do it. That's fine. That's
fair. Hangover.
That's fair.
You get into it. Happy birthday, Lisa. We'll talk about that through the show. Yes, we have Mateo newspapers coming up. Joining us now, an extremely well-timed Amanda Agati joins us. Really can't say enough about this timing. Chief Investment Officer for Asset Management, PNC Bank of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and really quite astute on the ratios. Amanda, how do we rationalize a multiple of 20 going to 24, a multiple of 26 going to 32, a multiple of 28 going to 40? Are we going to grow our way into rationalization?
We are not. Good morning, guys. It's so nice to be with you. And a very pivotal question to start things off this morning. Our view on this is that valuation this year, as opposed to the last few years, is going to be a key governor in terms of the market's path forward. That does not mean I am overly bearish this year. We still think market returns for this year are going to be strong, but I think the key to the path forward is much more about earnings growth. We're not going to see a lot of valuation multiple expansion in 25.
So let's start off here. We're starting off some of these earnings. We had the big banks put up some really nice earnings last week. We had Netflix, for example, put up some good numbers this week. What do you expect to see out of the earnings of corporate America this year and this quarter?
So I think Q4 earnings season may be a very nice sneak peek at what 2025 is going to look like. So far, again, it's early, of course, in terms of earnings season, but so far we've seen some real signs of life out of some sectors and industries that were sort of like quiet or maybe a little bit left in the dust in the last couple of years. It's been all about tech and comm services. That's not the story for Q4, and I don't think that's the story for 2025. We do think that we're going to see a little bit more signs of life in the more cyclical parts of the market. So financials, you called it out, industrials, materials, energy, even parts of healthcare, which has gotten really beaten up as a function of the election, may see a cyclical kind of reacceleration in 25, which is good news for the market rally.
Amanda, the street's kind of looking for low double-digit earnings increases for calendar year 2025, which seems pretty brave here. Is that a top-line story? Is it a margin story? Is it a combination of the two?
It's not so much about a top line story. I mean, there's still some revenue growth expectations there, but it's not a one for one in terms of revenue growth and this earnings growth story. I think it's much more about margins. We're pretty far off the cycle peak for margins, so I think there is some room to see margins reaccelerate here, and we're actually seeing some pricing power too, which is good.
Amanda, Hans Vestberg's over on the Death Star, talking to Becky and Andrew right now. Okay, great. Verizon has a 6% yield. The 10-year total return, Paul, killing it at a CD level.
Yes.
3.3% per year.
Big dividend.
Amanda, forget about Verizon. When you look at the stock market and everybody this weekend who's asset allocating, is it basically 30% of stocks do well, while Verizon and 70% of the other stocks are in the tank?
Well, that's kind of the dynamic that's been in place. I would say it's even more extreme than that. In the last couple of years, it's been one name or maybe even 7 or 10 at the most that have done anything, and everybody else has been in hibernation mode. That's a real distortion, right? That's not a healthy way to drive a market rally. And so, post-election here, we started to see a little bit more breadth in terms of the market. We've doubled breadth really since the election. So I think that's a very healthy sign that we're going to see more leadership in 25.
Kathy Bond-Johnson coming up. Right now, Amanda Gotti with us with PNC to talk about what you're going to be talking about. Where, Paul? In the kitchen, on the deck, wherever. It's asset allocation January.
Exactly.
It's not dry January. It's asset allocation January.
Exactly. Amanda, how do you think about valuation here? I mean, if I look at just the top line, it feels heavy in terms of valuation, but then, I see a lot of research where if I pull out, 5, 6, 7, 8 names, the market doesn't seem that overpriced. How do you guys think about valuation in this market?
Yeah, I mean, we were slicing and dicing the market all sorts of different ways to get to the underlying, perspective on valuations. The top 10 stocks in the S&P 500 are trading at almost 35 times the forward PE. It's straight up insane. And then the bottom 490 are a little bit over 20, approaching 21 times. The bottom 490 are not cheap, right? That's not a cheap valuation level, but there's a huge disparity there. And so to the extent that we get some broader participation, I think those other names, those 490, do have a little bit of room to accelerate in terms of price returns this year.
Let's talk about asset allocation. Let's begin with cash. Amanda Gotti. Is cash legitimate? I mean, if I'm making the numbers up, $6 trillion. I think that's 6,000 billion. 6,000 billion, or Francine Lacroix would say millions or something.
Okay.
I'm lost. Anyways, are we going to build out to 8 trillion cash, Amanda?
Well, I don't know if I can give you an answer on getting to that bogey per se, but in this environment, I would just say that cash is not a particularly great investment like it has been the last couple of years. So, with what the Fed is doing, even though rates are coming down at a much slower pace than what investors would like, we've been spending a lot of time with clients talking about reallocating that cash or even those money market yields into equities, parts of fixed income, and certainly alternatives. So that's one of the hottest topics right now, getting investors out of their cash stockpiles in 25.
So beside the prospects of the Pittsburgh Pirates, where is the asset allocation in equities at PNC Bank?
So, well, I'm focused on the Philadelphia Eagles prospects.
Yes. So
can I just say we're really in it?
No wonder
so
you're never on
exciting.
daybreak.
Yes.
Nathan Hager doesn't want to run.
Oh, well, we're very excited about the game coming up this weekend. But put that aside, the areas of equities that we're really focused on are, you have to be in the game with large cap, but I do think there are pockets of mid and small that are going to see a little bit of a cyclical rebound in the first part of this year. And then, emerging markets is a place that's been sort of left for dead. Investors hate it. The sentiment is terrible there. But the valuation story is really compelling. We'd be avoiding a lot of aspects of developed international right now. We're underweight there, likely going further underweight.
Amanda, with all the celeb types, A-list talent I've met, I've been very fortunate, a whole bunch. Can I just say that one of the great class acts I spent a lot of time with one day was Donovan McNabb. Donovan McNabb was a complete, total class act.
Good to hear.
Really, really
amazing.
It was a charity thing.
Love it.
It was really good. That's all the Eagles love.
That's all you got.
That's all the Eagles love. She gets from me today. Amanda Agati, thank you so much. Out on YouTube, you can see my Buffalo Bills hat. Subscribe to Bloomberg Surveillance. Good morning out I-80 to Orchard Park. That's where they play.
That's exactly right.
It's West Lockport.
Oh my goodness!
For people in Western
people in the know.
York. Right now, we're going to come over. This is a perfect setup here. Amanda Gotti over to Kathleen Bostjancic with Nationwide. She's been partying in some bar in Columbus like for the last week. I'm surprised we got her today. Kathleen Bostjancic of Nationwide, and of course that's always Columbus of the Ohio State. Kathy, is the economy going to be like the Ohio State and get it done for 2025?
Well, good morning, Tom. Well, the economy's been a real champ for the last 2 years. Let's root and hope we can get a third year. And certainly there's lots of optimism right now, especially in the business community.
Is it legit?
Well, I think that it is in the sense that there's going to be a lot of deregulation and more pro-growth measures for businesses. So I think in that sense, there's a lot of warranted optimism. I think we're still not sure with 100% clarity is what happens with tariffs and also immigration, what impact that can have. But it looks like the early signs so far on the tariffs that maybe President Trump's going to go a bit lighter on the tariff tools, and there's some relief in that in the markets right now.
Yeah, this just coming in. This is from the Pro reports. We'll talk about this a number of times through the show. We don't have, as we had with President Biden, official releases of what President Trump will do, and I'm sure Michael Barr will be on this, but we believe from the Pro reports that the president will travel to Asheville, North Carolina, and then on to Los Angeles. And I'll editorialize. That's a nice touch.
That is.
We cannot forget
North Carolina.
The Carolinas. And good morning to Asheville's got a terrific music scene and just devastated down by the
absolutely.
river there.
Hopefully some rain coming to the LA area this weekend. Kathy, talk to us about, I guess really over the last 3-4 days, a lot of the focus has been in Switzerland on Davos, and the discussion there has been about tariffs coming from the U.S. and maybe retaliation from other countries. How are you factoring in the concept of tariffs for global trade, global economic growth?
Yeah, Paul, it's a tough thing to try to you can model it. It's tough to try to speculate exactly what will be implemented. But what we did was really look at the first Trump presidential term, and try to replicate that in terms of, okay, we'll probably get those type of tariffs implemented, or at least that size and scope. And that was mainly aimed at China. So that meant that we added about 0.3 of a percentage point to inflation. So it's a moderate higher inflation rate. And we took about the same amount off of our growth projection. So we still have solid growth this year, but a little less buoyant. Now, Canada and Mexico, tariffs would be a very different story, and particularly the size that's been talked about. So we modeled, this is as an example, and again, I think it's because of the size impact, it's probably unlikely they get implemented, but we have to do this work to see. And if 25% tariffs were slapped on China and Canada and Mexico, that would boost inflation in the U.S. by 0.5 of percentage points.
Right.
So if you're looking at inflation, let's say running around 2.7 for this year, it's 3.2%. That's a pretty big game changer, and it's a drag on growth of about 0.7. But as we know, none of that's happened yet. That's the good news, and it may be just negotiation tactics. Probably is. Right, and try to pull forward negotiations on the USMCA deal.
Yeah, Kathy, let me squeeze this in. One final question here. The great wrong of 2024 was misjudging the consumer. Does a consumer have pop out to Labor Day of this year?
So the consumer does have a lot of momentum and power. I think we're looking for some moderation because the last 2 years have been so strong, but it's going to come down to jobs and income growth. And also remember, the upper income households have this powerful wealth effect, both from stocks and from housing values going up. So we think the consumer continues to motor along, but we look for a little bit of moderation. But we'll have to see with labor trends. If employment continues to surprise in the upside, so will the consumer.
Okay, Kathleen, thank you so much. Kathleen Best-Johnston from the Nationwide. You do that like the Ohio
State University. Yep.
The Nationwide. Yep. Now joining us from New York City with the news, the Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Tom, Paul, and Lisa. President Donald Trump is heading to hurricane-battered western North Carolina and wildfire-ravaged Los Angeles. Trump has criticized the Biden administration for its handling of Hurricane Helene in North Carolina and suggested withholding money from California unless it changes water policies. A federal judge in Washington state has temporarily blocked President Trump's executive order denying U.S. citizenship to children born from undocumented parents living in the country. The hearing didn't even take a half an hour. Judge John Kuhnauer said in his 4 decades on the bench, he's never seen such a clear case. The Reagan appointee called President Trump's order blatantly unconstitutional and said it boggles his mind that any lawyer would unequivocally assert otherwise. President Trump pledged to fight it.
Obviously, we'll appeal it. They put it before a certain judge in Seattle, I guess, right? And there's no surprises with that judge.
Loyola Law School professor Jessica Levinson.
For a judge at a temporary restraining order to say blatantly unconstitutional, it is worth emphasizing that you don't typically see that type of language at this initial stage.
Professor Levinson. Secretary of Defense nominee Pete Hegseth told Senator Elizabeth Warren he paid $50,000 to the woman who accused him of sexual assault in 2017. That's according to several media outlets who report the amount was included in Hegseth's response to questions Warren asked as part of the vetting process for the top Pentagon job. Hegseth's nomination advanced on a preliminary vote, 51-49. The full Senate is scheduled to take a final vote on Hegseth today. Americans are one step closer to learning more about 3 of the biggest assassinations in the U.S. President Trump ordering the release of documents from the assassinations of President John F. Kennedy, his brother Senator Robert Kennedy, and civil rights leader Martin Luther King Jr. Global news, 24 hours a day, and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg. Tom, Paul, Lisa.
Obligatory football talk. Lisa's birthday. She should get the football talk out early.
Okay.
So we did. I mean, Lions, Eagles, it looks to be,
That'll be big.
It'll be big.
Yep.
It'll be big. This is killing me. Ben Johnson out the door. Aaron Glenn out the door. Terrell Williams I guess he's going out the door to the New England Patriots. He was ex, but you lose like the staff, Michael Barr. How do you regroup?
Well, I've been called up to be the ball boy for the Jets. So, I mean, how do you do it? I mean,
the talent walks, literally the talent for a leading team has walked out the door.
I love head coach Dan Campbell for the Lions, but when you, and forgive this term, but when you lose your two big wingmen, you know, you got to rebuild, and how you got to find those guys.
I mean, the Giants, I mean, you talk about the New York Giants, if these coaches, it's like really no big deal, right?
Oh, it's just,
like, please move on.
Just
but this
try
is
to build a base here.
I mean,
what happens when you get that success that Detroit's had over the last couple of years?
You move to Buffalo.
Yeah, exactly. Shuffle off.
Thank you. That's our football talk for the day. Mateo says enough. It'll be fun this weekend.
It'll be.
And it's going to be warmer. It's a little warmer today.
Warmer. Yeah, we're going to push 40 here in New York City on Sunday. How about that?
Somebody said my snowblower, what do I have? It's gas powered.
Oh, you're one of those guys.
I don't have like the granola
guy.
guy.
You're one of those guys.
Yeah,
okay.
I try,
Upper East Side, I'm sure they love you up there.
It moves so much that the snow goes into Central Park. Good morning.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. We've got futures falling as President Trump hinted about a softer approach toward tariffs during an interview. Right now we have NASDAQ futures, a little change, down about 4 points. Dow futures up down about 0.2%, 117 points. And S&P futures, little change, down about 4. We have the 2-year yield at 4.27%, down 1 basis point. The yield on the 10-year, 4.63%, and that is little changed. We have the Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index down about 0.4%. Shares of Boeing, they're lower. They're down about 1%. Posted preliminary sales about $1.5 billion below estimates. The full earnings report, they'll be out on Tuesday. And shares of Novo Nordisk getting a little bit of a lift. ADR is up 12%. That's after an experimental shot delivered as much as 22% weight loss in an early stage trial. And a lift to luxury. Tom was talking about this. Burberry shares up 13% in London. Better than expected sales thanks to U.S. shoppers. Apparently they got some good deals because they slashed their prices by as much as 50% over the holiday season. There you go. And this report was sponsored by IBKR. Will the U.S. CPI exceed 2.8% in January 2025? Trade your prediction with IBKR Forecast Trader. The yes was recently at 35%. Buy yes or no and earn $1 if you're right. Go to IBKR.com/forecast. Paul and Tom.
Lisa, thanks so much. Joining us on Dan Ives with Wedbush. He has a title, Global Head, Technology Research and Fashion Design. Dan Ives, let's go to Mag 7 next week. I guess it starts out with Microsoft on the 29th, Apple 30th, out to NVIDIA the end of February. What are we going to see from Mag 7 this earnings season?
I think it's CapEx in terms of AI. And what that's going to show is that this AI revolution's on to its next stage, which is software. We're expecting a massive week next week in terms of for the hyperscalers. I think Apple, the bears have owned this narrative. They will prove the doubters. A little weak in terms of China. I think overall they actually beat numbers. I think Apple is one that this sort of marks the bottom that we believe we'll see for the year in Apple.
Dan, let's go there. Spend a little bit more time on Apple. The stock is down about 10% year to date, which is really unusual for that name here. Give us what the concerns are specifically about phone sales in China.
Look, and let's go through numbers too. Look, China has been soft clearly like the last few quarters in terms of what we've seen with the headwinds there in the market. But when it comes to the AI release, Apple Intelligence, that we believe that's actually not going to get released till April. Baidu, Tencent, ByteDance likely going to be the partner. Is it a little softer? It's about 2 to 3% softer in China. So just to put numbers around it, Street was anticipating 225 million units for the year. We believe right now it's tracking about 230 million, 5 million ahead. Mm-hmm. The best case was 240 million. So maybe that's off the table. Paul and Tom, I think this is as way overdone sell-off as I've seen on Apple in a number of years.
Dan, talk to us about Palantir. That's a name that maybe not a lot of people know when they think about these big tech stocks. And I know you guys have been aggressive on this name, and it's been just such a great performer. Over the trailing 12 months, the stock's up 370%. Give us your call on Palantir.
I believe it's the next Oracle or Salesforce. Because my view when it comes to the AI revolution, this is probably the best software pure play in the market. Just like NVIDIA on chips, this is how I view where Palantir is on the software side. And that's why, look, many have hated this. They hated this as a teenager to start the year, 12, 13. And they despise it as a senior citizen living in Florida at 80, right? So,
right.
And I believe this could ultimately be a stock that ultimately, when you look out, who could be the next Oracle Salesforce? I think it's Palantir.
Dan, go down the Apple income statement. Okay, I got single-digit revenue growth, and the gloom crew hangs on that, given the multiple 20, 30, wherever the multiple is. But the magic happens down the income statement to generate cash. Is any part of that system, given Paul's question on China, or frankly, another 6 worries, like, is what's going to happen in Silos season 3. But with any worries of Apple, is the cash generating machine broken?
Free cash flow is going to increase 12 to 15% the next 2 to 3 years.
So what happens? Stop. What happens at the end of the month? At 4:22 p.m., when we go, OMG, China was light, but cash flow's up how much, Dan?
I believe cash flows probably beats 3 to 5%, and free cash flow for the year will be up 12 to 15%, which is why I believe this marks the bottom. I believe Apple is a stock.
Okay, so, good morning, Mr. Buffet. Mr. Buffet likes to listen when Dan Ives is on. Are you telling Warren Buffett at Berkshire to buy more Apple?
Oh, I think it's a table pounder because it's my view. You talk about Apple being light in the quarter, but they're going to announce an Apple Intelligent partner in the next few months. And then you ultimately are going to have 25% of the world's population. When they access AI, it's going to go through an Apple device. So my view is just, it's one, that's how so many have missed the last $2.5 trillion in market cap in Apple. They focus on the bears coming out. They own the narrative. They scare white knuckles. And then Cook and Cupertino come through and you're like, and that continues to be the mantra here. This is a name you own. You don't sell Apple, you own it.
Dan, AI 2025, how are you suggesting people play it in 2025? Is there a difference from maybe how they've played it with the chips and some of the software names over the last 2 years?
Yeah, I think now you still own Godfather of AI, Jensen, NVIDIA. You still own the hyperscalers, Microsoft, Google, and obviously Amazon. But now you play the software plays. Palantir, Salesforce, ServiceNow, Mongo, and even Oklo and some of the nuclear plays. I think those are some of the second, third derivatives.
When you take the Palantir to the moon nap, do you really use the Barclay pillow, the Eagles Barclay pillow you've got in your merch section, Dan? Are you really napping with that puppy?
Again, I put that Barclay pillow in a special sort of. I never nap on that. And again, when you never nap on the goat. But the point is, look, the Barclay of tech is AI. And I think now, and that's not stopping, right? And I think it's why I believe tech stocks are going to be up 25% this year. And it's why probably the Birds win this weekend.
Let's talk to a simple idiot like me, okay? The fact is, I'm starting to look at the AI summaries at the top of every Bloomberg story. I'm starting to look at AI above the Google stuff I used to look for. Is that the transition, Dan Ives, that's going to happen for our audience?
Well, it is, because now we're just starting to see the use cases play out, whether it's on the consumer or on the enterprise. And it's my view, it's the fourth industrial revolution, because for every dollar spent on NVIDIA chip, there's an $8 to $10 multiplier across the rest of tech. So even when you look at things like Stargate and others in terms of the Beltway, this is the start of what's going to be a generational build-out.
You sort of disappeared for a week. Was it the depression over getting pounded by Notre Dame in a Penn State fashion?
First of all, pounded, remember, it's a field goal, and and I give credit to Notre Dame, but look, I will admit I went into a little dark place for a few days after, but guess what? Now we're focused on 25 season and Big Ten going for the hat trick, Penn State win in 25.
Dan Ives, thank you so much. Greatly appreciated. This morning with Webbish. I mean, we got to get them back through the tech season. It's amazing.
Sure, absolutely. That's good.
I looked at I'm not going to mention the stock. I looked at a famous, booming stock, and it's like clockwork. November, it rolls over. Mm-hmm. OMG, earnings are going to be terrible.
Yep.
Boom. It wasn't Apple. And that's what Dan Ives is saying with Apple again.
No, I mean, Dan Ives, quote unquote, Apple's a table pounder here. Stock's down about 10.7% year to date. Really, a trailing 12 months, Tom, it's only up 15%. So lagging the market.
It's lagging. I'd say it's lagging the zeitgeist.
Yeah. And so, again, I think as Dan suggested, the next wave, if it's going to get it, is going to be AI and really getting an AI play.
Mr. Buffett, thank you so much for watching. Warren Buffett watching in Omaha.
300 million shares. He owns 300 million shares.
It's huge. It's like J.P. Morgan. We don't understand how big it is.
Yep.
I mean, it's all there is to it. Futures -4. A little weight to the tape. Again, the president traveling. Our report from Pooled Reports is traveling to Asheville, North Carolina, and then to Los Angeles.
Yep. So Asheville, obviously, still recovering from those crazy hurricanes that came in. People move to Asheville because they think there's little to no weather risk. I'm off the coast of North Carolina. I'm away from some of the crazy weather, the tornadoes in the Midwest. I'll come to beautiful Asheville, North Carolina. Boom, they get hit, and they're still recovering.
What do the dolphins do in the cold? They just go south? They just know to go south?
I don't know. I tell you, we noted them. They were no dolphins in Aruba. Lots of other fish, but no dolphins in Aruba. So I guess they like the Jersey coast. I'm
glad he brings it up, Lisa, because he's still tanned and rested.
Exactly. Got the Irish tan.
What are you doing?
You got the freckles. That's
what are you doing?
Yes, exactly.
What are you doing for your birthday? Cleaning your daughter's room?
No, I'm going on more college tours in some lowly Pennsylvania hotel.
Yes,
it's like pulling teeth.
Yep.
Coming up, we'll do the newspapers with Birthday Girl. We'll get to that in a moment. Futures, -4. Bloomberg surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. We've got futures lower this morning, and this is after a record-setting day on Wall Street. The S&P 500 closing at a fresh all-time high. We'll start with S&P futures right now. They're down about 0.1%, 6 points. Dow futures down 0.2%, 119 points. NASDAQ futures, little change, down about 11. The 2-year yield, 4.28%. That's down 1 basis point. The yield on the 10-year, 4.64%, and that is little change. The Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index down about 0.4%. On the economic calendar for today, we have S&P Global's report on manufacturing services PMI. That's at 9:45 Wall Street time, followed by a read on sentiment, existing home sales. That's about 15 minutes later. A few companies making news. We'll start with Tesla. It will release a software update of about 1.2 million cars in China. That's to fix a power steering and rear view camera issue. Then on another note, Tesla launched a refreshed version of its Model Y SUV in the U.S. and Europe. Starting price just under $60,000. And look out, Tesla Rivian is launching a hands-free driving system this year, and it's, quote, eyes-off systems in 2026. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and Tom.
Lisa, we like Rivian. One of their drivers sent me a photo watching YouTube.
Not while driving.
In the Rivian.
Oh, no.
I think while driving. He said he inflicts it on his 2 children.
Oh, no.
He has 2 sons, and their life has changed forever because of listening to our twisted humor and that. He blamed it specifically on you in the newspapers.
Yes.
To President Trump yesterday in Davos, Total's leadership, Patrick Poyan, was giving a question. This is Total Energy of Paris. Their dividend's 5.6%. Verizon's dividend is like 6.7%. The queen of garbage dividends, knowing when it's a value trap, Margie Patel joins us now. She's senior portfolio manager, Allspring. Margie, how big of a dividend, like Verizon, is when you say it's too big of a dividend?
Well, I don't know too big, but generally a dividend that's much above average, A, of its industry, and B, just the market in general, and actually approaching, say, a treasury yield, short-term treasury yield, says that the investors have driven the stock price down, the dividend high, and it says to me that it probably is continuing to be a value trap. There are better places to be.
How do you feel about this year for doing the Margie Patel magic of finding dividend growth in attractive yield? Is it a redux of last year?
Yeah, I think it is, Tom. I think it's a continuation of the same trends we saw last year. And as far as dividends, I think a lower dividend tends to produce a higher total return. You have more capital appreciation. And I think that hasn't changed, much as investors would love to have big dividends from equities.
Margie, it seems like any performance in the stock market in 2025 is going to have to be earnings driven, because it appears like at this point, maybe we're only get 1 or 2 rate cuts from the Fed here. How much of a concern is the dependence on double-digit earnings growth, which seems to be the consensus right now for this market?
Yeah, well, I think that's actually what we get, because last year you had the economy growing, say 2.5%. This year it looks like more of the same, although maybe we'll have surprises on the upside of growth. And that was enough to produce S&P revenues of 4% last year and profit growth overall of above 12%. So I think that we'll see more or less that same thing, revenue growth in that 4% area, and not counting on price earnings ratio expansion like we did last year, so that says stocks could be up, 10, 12% in line with profit growth.
On the fixed income side, Margie, do we sit there with a 2-year treasury at 4.3%, or do we try to take some credit risk in this market?
Well, I think credit risk is still the best place to get extra yield, because defaults in corporate bonds are quite low, and they're expected to stay very low. High yield companies have refinanced their short-term debt. They're mostly profitable. There's no industry in trouble. And there's actually, I'd say, kind of a scarcity of good quality names. So yield spreads are at their narrowest, say 2 to 3 percentage points over treasuries, but it's still extra yield. And I don't think you'll have to give it back in terms of bankruptcies and defaults. So I'd say it's still not as good as a bargain as other years, but still pretty attractive if you only want the income.
Margie, I don't want you to talk specifically about Apple, but do you sit there in January and say to a given company, I get a dividend, I'm modeling dividend growth at Allspring, I'm modeling a share buyback at Allspring, So on a given stock, I'm starting the year with a 4, a 5, dare I say an 8% return. Is there a select group of stocks out there like that?
Well, I think there are a lot of stocks out there that have proven they have some resiliency in their earnings growth, besides some of the high flyers that have profit growth of, say, 20%. But I think there are plenty of companies that will match that 10, 12% earnings growth and allow for increases in dividends, which is actually what we've seen, and some share buybacks.
Margie, it seems like really as long as most people can remember, technology has been a sector that's driven this equity market higher. Do you expect that to be the case in 2025? Will tech be the leader?
Yes, I think it will continue to be one of the leaders simply because it's been a secular growing sector for decades, really. And I don't see any sign that will change. There's innovation that continues to drive demand and expand the market.
Right.
So that's why you have to say I think tech is still going to be one of the best sectors.
I mean, on the Bloomberg market, your portfolio, the Dividend Diversified Capital Builder Fund, 83rd percentile 3-year. Year to date, you're only in the 92nd percentile. Margie, can you manage the Red Sox? With that track record, can we get you out there at Fenway?
I don't know if those skills are transferable.
We'll have to see. Margie Patel, thank you so much from Boston, always with Allspring, legendary on dividend growth. Speaking of legendary with our news in New York City, Michael.
Thank you very much, Tom, Paul, Lisa. President Trump plans to visit 2 cities hit hard by natural disasters. Trump will head to western North Carolina that was slammed by Hurricane Helene. He will also visit Los Angeles, ravaged by wildfires. A federal judge has temporarily blocked President Trump's executive order restricting automatic U.S. citizenship at birth for children of undocumented immigrants or have a temporary legal status. Judge John Kuhnauer called the order blatantly unconstitutional and questioned the quality of lawyering within the administration. Loyola Law School professor Jessica Levinson.
Then in 2 weeks, more briefing. And I expect, again, given the comments, given the language of the Constitution, I expect that the decision from the judge will be the same.
Professor Levinson, the Trump administration is facing at least 6 lawsuits over the order, with federal judges in Maryland and New Hampshire set to consider whether to block it from taking effect. Defense Secretary nominee Pete Hegseth reportedly paid $50,000 to a woman who accused him of sexual assault in 2017. The news comes as the Senate advanced Hegseth's nomination along a party line vote to a full Senate vote later today. Republican Senator Josh Hawley.
Democrats don't like basically any of these remaining nominees, so I'm sure they'll put up a fuss. But I'd suspect the next most difficult one will probably be Tulsi Gabbard.
Senator Josh Hawley, GOP Senators Susan Collins and Lisa Murkowski have already said they are a no vote. President Trump announced that he will declassify any remaining files from the assassinations of President John F. Kennedy, his brother Robert F. Kennedy, and civil rights leader Martin Luther King Jr. He signed an executive order at the White House. President Trump says this executive order will provide Americans the truth after 6 decades of secrecy. The official concludes that all 3 killings were carried out by lone gunmen, but they have long been challenged by a slew of conspiracy theories. Global news 24 hours a day, and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr. This is Bloomberg. Tom, Paul, Lisa.
Michael Barr, thanks so much. Out on YouTube, on live chat, Lisa Mateo getting out front on newspapers. Paul, I'm reading in.
You're reading in?
On yaks.
On what?
Tibetan yaks.
Really?
Y-A-K.
Okay.
A yak. They're like a bison, but they're a cow.
Okay.
Except they're not a cow. They're more like a bison.
Okay.
And they're
why
furry.
are we reading up on those?
I don't know. We're going to learn this in the newspapers.
Very good.
I have no idea.
Okay.
They're in the Himalayas or the Himalayas. I don't know how you pronounce that.
Himalayas.
Yaks.
I'm all about the alpaca. We have alpacas.
Do they have, Michael Barr, where you live, do they have yaks? I mean,
They have bears and wild turkeys.
Well, he lives in the middle of nowhere.
Really? You have turkeys like in the backyard?
Oh, it was one day I came in, there were wild turkeys to the left. There were deer to the right and jokers in the middle. They really were. I just like, wow, it was something.
It's like a Steve Miller Band song.
I know.
You know,
he lives in eastern Ohio.
It's true.
It's south of Cleveland, right?
Yes, exactly.
It's at that part
Talk
where
about a
you don't know
commute.
if it's Steelers or Browns, right?
Right. Yeah, right
It's that
smack in
area.
the middle.
Yeah, I get it. Okay. -8 here on futures. Importantly, Burberry with a better than good report. That's doing some strange things to some of the stocks this morning. And American Express out. Lisa will talk about that as well. From New York City with futures, -8. Bloomberg surveillance.
Now, a look at the front pages. What's making news around the world? Your daily roundup of today's headlines on Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene, Paul Sweeney, and Lisa Mateo.
Good morning, everyone. The daily look at the front page is the Lisa Mateo moment. It's brought to you by Oppenheimer. Oppenheimer focuses the power of their thinking on you, creating customized plans to help achieve your goals. Put the power of Oppenheimer thinking into your investing, wealth management, capital markets, investment banking. And we thank Oppenheimer for their support today on wealth management, capital markets, investment banking, and now the Yak report. What are you talking about?
Okay, cashmere, right? The hottest thing, very expensive, beautiful, feels nice and soft.
Perfect for a birthday.
Yes, but forget about it because there's a new luxury material that you have to be interested in. It's from the yak.
Oh, boy.
Yes. You were talking about it. What
This
the heck
is for
is a
men,
yak,
right?
It's for men.
Oh, okay.
It's a cattle. They're known for loud grunting, right? They could probably eat a little cashmere goat. But it's less expensive. The Wall Street Journal points it out. It's still soft. Not as soft as cashmere, but it has a little bit of a manly touch to it. So it's tough yet tender at the same time. So it has that feel
This
to
has
it.
a Dan I scarf.
Yeah.
Could be.
Maybe.
I'm looking at the American Trench, the
Okay.
Carl Yak shirt, $249.
Ooh.
Wow. Okay.
Compared to what
A
cashmere
yak
can
shirt.
run you almost $900.
Yep, the Todd Snyder
Sometimes.
knit cashmere overshirt, $998.
go, there you
So
go.
Yak is I guess it's just the pedestrian man's
Is it coming
cashmere.
from Tibet?
But they're saying, well, I don't know if it's from Tibet, but they're saying that it offers this like conversational piece because you're at a party and you can say, hey, my shirt's made from yak. No, that doesn't work?
No.
No?
All right.
Next.
I'm trying. Okay, President Trump moving back into the White House. He sent the D.C. luxury home market. It's on this buying spree right now because more people want to be his neighbor. So you have business leaders, new members of Congress, wealthy political appointees. They're all scooping up these like multi-million-dollar properties in D.C. and some of those surrounding neighborhoods. So I'll give you an example. December, Cantor Fitzgerald CEO Howard Lutnick, he's the president's pick for Commerce Secretary. He set a record for D.C. He paid $25 million for a home there. Also on the hunt, you have Treasury Secretary nominee Scott Bessent. He's looking for a home there. But the real estate agents, they're just saying that these are like big ticket deals that's really taking off faster than in any prior administration. You know,
In the
since he
D.C.
started.
metro area, there were 87 home sales above
Okay.
$5 million last year, compared with 53 in 2023 and 16 in 2026.
See, so the prices are just soaring.
Sure.
They're going
All
up
right.
because of that, because people want to be
I like the
around
Georgetown
him.
area. I could live in Georgetown.
There you go.
Georgetown is like $8 million to get
I know.
to slide
It's
into
always
something.
been good. Yep.
So is their
Unreal.
university.
Yes.
Next.
Check that one out. So if you have an old iPhone with TikTok installed on it, people are paying you big money for
Why?
this.
I saw this.
Okay,
Why?
yes.
I
The
don't
reason
get it.
because is the app is still not on the App Store. So when TikTok went down and went black and on Saturday,
It's not on the App Store.
it's not in the App Store. So people started deleting it once it went down on Saturday. but now they can't get it back up because it's not on the App Store anymore.
They can't re-download it.
They can't get it, and they need their TikTok.
So is TikTok still dark?
No, it's not dark anymore. It's back up and running.
All right, good, up and running. Good
but
for the TikTokers.
you can't get it if you want to go in the
addicted
App
to
Store.
it, you buy an old
If you buy an, can I tell you how much they're going for? They're selling on Facebook Marketplace, Poshmark, eBay, $3,000. One guy even said he paid $5,700.
Well, if that's your business, if that's your business, being an influencer or content creator, you got to be there, right?
If you deleted it, then you're stuck.
Yeah.
But but people are saying, you know what? Don't do it because they can have some spyware in there. You could be in trouble. They're saying that there are safer options. You can go to web browsers. They still have it on there. Reddit, people on Reddit are saying there's like a workaround to the app. There's always some kind of workaround. But it's a good way to make money if you have an old iPhone with TikTok.
Lisa Mateo, thank you so much. Our newspaper report today. Thank you, Oppenheimer, for your support of all that we do here.
The yak shirt.
This may be one of the great covers of all time. He will never be 84. He will always be 42 and holding. One N Diamond. Yeah, I could play Sweet Caroline. Forget about it. The Monkees out in L.A., they took his I'm a Believer and transformed it into the poppy thing. Happy birthday, Neil Diamond.
Now I'm a believer, not a trace of doubt in my mind. I'm in love. I'm a believer. I couldn't leave her if I tried.
This is Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney.
What do you say to people scared stiff in cash?
We've got an administration, presumably, that will be pro-business, lower taxes.
With Lisa Mateo on markets.
AI affecting demand for cloud computing.
And Michael Barr with news.
The president is focused on geopolitics.
The best in economics, finance, investment, and international relations. This is Bloomberg Surveillance on Bloomberg Radio.
Good morning, everyone. Paul Sweeney, Tom Keene, Michael Barr. Happy birthday to Lisa Mateo as well. We got a packed 8 o'clock hour for you. Wall Street Times Sarah Hunt will redefine equity markets. We're really looking for this into the tech earnings season. Dan Ives was on fire today.
Oh, yeah. Always.
On fire.
On Apple. I mean, he's pounding the table now.
Pounding Apple is out on Twitter.
Underperformance.
Thank you, Mr. Buffet, for the interest in Omaha. Net Berkshire has it. They lightened up, but they still have a lot.
300 million shares. How about
that?
Oh,
really?
Yeah, how about that?
Okay, well, that'll
get
do
your
it.
attention.
In a moment, the research piece of the week, George Saravelos of Deutsche Bank. Really, really important piece for North America. We say good morning to all of you in the early, frigid morning of Canada as well. Let's get right to it. Bloomberg Surveillance this morning. Brought to you by Cohn Resnick Advisory, Assurance Tax for 4 straight years. Hedge Week, his name Cohn Resnick Audit Firm of the Year. Let Cohn Resnick's financial services team show you why. And we thank Cohn Resnick for heritage support here this morning. Right to it from the Interactive Broker Studios, the Bloomberg Business Flash. Lisa Mateo.
Yeah, and Tom, we had a record-setting day for the S&P 500 yesterday. In fact, all the major averages ending higher. Came right after President Trump promised to push Saudi Arabia and OPEC to lower oil prices and also push the Federal Reserve to lower taxes, but to lower rates. But this morning, futures, they're lower. NASDAQ futures down about 7 points. Dow futures down 94. S&P futures down 6. We have the 2-year yield, 4.28%, down 1 basis point. The yield on the 10-year, 4.64%. And that is little change. To currencies, the Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index down about 0.3%. I have to point out the Japanese yen at 156.48 against the dollar. This is after the BOJ raised its key rate, the highest level in 17 years. We have the euro up 0.6% at 104.77. And the British pound up about 0.4%. We have Bitcoin up more than 2.5% at just over 105,000. To earnings we go. Well, we'll start with Verizon. They had a beat on earnings expectations. Higher prices for its plans. That actually helped the company's wireless service business make more money than a year ago. Shares were higher. Right now, they're up just about 0.1%. And we have shares of American Express. They're lower. They're down 0.2%. This is despite profits increasing 12%. That's due to higher than expected spending on credit cards during the holidays. And speaking of which, maybe people use those Amex cards to buy Burberry trench coats because it reported better than expected sales. U.S. shoppers splurging on the high-end fashion. Burberry shares up 12% in London. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and Tom.
Thanks so much. Greatly appreciated. Lisa, there's always in a given week 2, 3, 4 research reports that stick out. A couple days ago, George Saravelos put out an absolute jewel of Deutsche Bank information, bursting stereotypes on all that's going on tariffs, international dynamics, economics, and of course, the whole debate here that we have. He joins us now from Deutsche Bank. George, thank you so much for being with us. Figure 2, no one knows this, including the President of the United States. If you take out our addiction to Canadian oil and gas, we run a trade surplus with Canada?
Yes, the US does if you exclude energy. And I think one of the challenges in thinking through about tariff risks is the economic impact. And if you compare the economic impact of tariffs on Canada versus, for example, China on the US, it would be far larger because Canada has a bigger capacity to retaliate. There's a reliance on energy that creates inflation. So the market is questioning how much President Trump will go ahead with the tariffs he's threatening on Canada as soon as February 1st. And it's going to be a learning process.
Does the x-axis matter? Is the timing important? Like they want to tranche it out, or is all in one big one or that? Does that matter to George Saravelos?
I think, well, what matters to me is what impacts the market. And if you look at the price action this week in the market, what was interesting, and it's something we had warned about the previous week, the market was expecting an immediate tariff announcement. You could see it in the risk premium that was priced in to the volatility space. You could see it in inflation break-evens. And therefore, when tariffs were not announced on the first day of President Trump's new administration, you have seen the market squeeze in terms of the dollar longs. Now we're entering next week with almost the opposite dynamic. The market has completely taken out the risk premium of potential immediate tariffs, especially with regard to Canada, and that would be a big shock.
I mean, I figure 9, Paul, this brilliant research report. Folks, we protect the copyright of our guests. You're not going to get it from me or Paul. Go to Deutsche Bank to get the Saravelos research. The U.S. imports more oil from Canada than all other countries combined.
I did not know that.
I mean, that's what you get from Saravelos.
Saravelos. Yeah. So, George, in your market, in the currency market, how have traders been positioning themselves for a world where there may be higher trade tariffs, not just Canada and Mexico, but kind of across the board?
So this is really the key question for the market and the big driver this year so far. It's what I would call the tariff risk premium, how much of that risk premium is priced into the market. And traders have been positioned for some probability of tariffs going ahead. I think what we saw this week was just how aggressively people were expecting immediate tariffs, and that is why we're seeing some reversal of recent trends. But if you're looking at the cumulative amount of tariffs that are priced in, especially after the retracements we've seen this week, you're actually not seeing that much. I would say the market is at the very lower end, if not below the lower end of what is a reasonable range of tariffs going forward. Right. And that's really the reason why we still see the risks are skewed towards more in terms of dollar strength, because the market at the moment, I think, is underpricing the full extent of tariffs that could materialize.
In this hour across the nation on your Friday on YouTube, again, subscribe to Bloomberg Podcast Building each and every day, including the weekends. There's a lot of podcasts watching during the weekends. George Saravelos with us. We continue. He is with Deutsche Bank. Coming up, Sarah Hunt will talk equities with her. Paul?
George, is there any reasonable bear case for the U.S. dollar? I just don't see it out there, and I haven't for the longest time.
You mean a reasonable case for the dollar to weaken or to strengthen?
Yeah, just kind of a bearish case for the U.S. dollar.
So I can give you a historical example. When President Trump started his first administration, the market was also expecting dollar strength, and you saw two things happening. You saw any progress on fiscal and tax reform stall for 9 months as the administration was trying to repeal Obamacare, and you saw a big upswing in global growth. I think if you saw a repetition of that, the dollar would most certainly weaken. But what we're seeing this time is the administration picking up pace. The immediate focus is on tax cuts, it is on trade, and the global environment looks a lot more challenging. So I can always build a bearish case for the dollar, but from my perspective, I think the hurdle is much higher than what it was in 2019.
The news flow is extraordinary, George. I got to do an audible here. Just in the last 12 hours, 18 hours, the president has reverted in Fed speak, and I think indirectly in currency speak, to what we knew Donald Trump to be, which is he likes lower interest rates. I mean, he's a real estate guy. Which real estate guy, Paul, doesn't like lower interest rates? Introduce him to me sometime. George, the president wants lower interest rates from Chairman Powell. I believe he stated at Davos he is going to lower interest rates. Let's just begin with that. With your Cambridge economics, can a government leader force interest rates lower?
If the Fed is independent and this institutional independence is maintained, then the answer is no. The transmission would work via Fed appointments, but then if you're looking at the Fed appointment process, which requires Senate confirmation, and also the number of Fed governors that are up for reappointment, there's not that many.
Yeah.
But what I would say, going back to the question around the bear case for the dollar, the single biggest risk would be a compromise of Fed independence. We certainly don't see that from our perspective, because I think the administration is well aware that if that was to happen, it would lead to all sorts of other bad things happening. For example, yields going up rather than down, especially in the back end.
Exactly.
But I think it's for that reason that the commentary is likely to remain verbal rather than genuinely impacting Fed policy, which is what we saw last time.
And Governor Lucetti will straighten that out. One final question, George Saravelos. The president wants a weak dollar. He's been that way since before he was president as well. How far are we from the tension of the Plaza Accord, where there was a primal scream for a weak dollar?
So you raise a very interesting question, Tom, because by this time in the first administration, we already had the Secretary of Treasury nominee Mnuchin talking down the dollar. We had tweets from President Trump talking down the dollar. And this time, what I'm seeing is something very different. I'm seeing Scott Bessent in the Senate testimony hearing talk about the importance of the dollar as a reserve currency. I'm not seeing Trump talk about the dollar all that much at all. In fact, I think he hasn't even mentioned anything since the Bloomberg interview he gave way before the election. I think the reason behind that is the administration is realizing a strong dollar helps keep US inflation down. And therefore, from that perspective, it's one of the few things that I think are different from the first administration, that they're actually less keen on a weak dollar to help U.S. inflation come down.
Got to run. George Saravelos, congratulations for the research piece of the week. Just absolutely outstanding, Mr. Saravelos at Deutsche Bank. We go right away, just because of time. Sarah Hunt joins us now on the equity markets. Are you surprised at the day after day bid of the market?
I'm not really, because what we're looking at right now is, again, all the optimism, and people are putting the pessimism or the things that might go wrong aside. Because
of earnings or Washington?
So Washington, but earnings have helped, right? So earnings helped a lot. Banks needed to come in with good numbers. They did. If we can see earnings come in good, that's going to go well.
Because it seems like 2025, if this market's going to move higher after 2 years of 20% plus returns, and a Fed that's probably not going to be that active in 2025 in terms of lowering rates, earnings really have to drive the story here. Are you confident in a 11, 12, 13% growth in S&P earnings?
It depends a lot, again, now what's going to happen with technology, right? Okay. You can look at the energy sector and go, okay, oil prices are higher. That's going to help earnings for the S&P as a whole, where last year it was a detriment. There are going to be areas where you need to see that growth coming through, because the multiple is, it's hard to see multiple expansion. You need to see that earnings grow into that so that you can see that market move higher.
One of the sectors that has been a Trump trade kind of sector is financials. Mm-hmm. The expectation that the regulatory environment is going to ease, if nothing else, that would be beneficial. Do you ascribe to that? Have you guys stepped up your exposure to financials?
I wouldn't say that we've necessarily stepped it up because we had representation there and basically a lot more in the larger banks because I think there may be some issues with the regional banks. But I think that just the fact that you may see an M&A boom after you've got a change at the FTC might help on the financial sector because you have a lot of smaller banks. I think that what the market is looking for is a change in the tone, both from a regulatory standpoint and from an M&A standpoint.
I guess with this new administration, there's been, I think, a palpable sense of economic optimism. I'm not sure if it's animal spirits is the right word, but people feel like this is an administration and a government that is pro-business, pro-growth. If that's in fact the sense, is this maybe a time for smaller caps, mid-caps to actually do well?
I think it absolutely is. And I think that, that's going to depend a lot on what happens to the rest of the underlying economic data, because for small caps to do well, you need to see a good economy. The fact that the Fed is likely to be backing off a bit here is tougher for small caps because higher rates are tougher for them as a group. But I think that could be, if the U.S. does do well, small and mid should do well as well.
Not once, but twice this weekend, I got grilled on international stocks. And I went back and looked at my Sarah Hunt notes. And the basic idea is they're completely correlated to weak dollar. Am I right on that?
I think it is a much bigger driver than what's going on for them economically. And one of the reasons that you would think they should be less strong is because what's going on in Europe is not fantastic economically, but there definitely is a currency trade-off there. And I think that it's sort of like when the U.S., when interest rates go higher, the tech group goes lower.
Yeah.
When the dollar gets weaker,
How do you digest, and I don't want you to talk about Apple specifically unless you want to, but there's like rumors, OMG, somebody's this or that, there's a shortfall. There's these research geeks measuring things on whatever product. Do you lean over the desk and listen to those people, read those people, or is it just tangential noise?
I think it has to be part of what you're looking at altogether, because you don't want to be surprised by some sort of a shortfall, but the market doesn't seem to be enormously surprised. I think it really depends on what else is going on underneath. For something like Apple specifically, that service revenue and that recurring revenue is a bigger part of what people look at in the story. The hardware is still important. So if there's a shortfall and it's not continuous, that's probably not as big a deal.
You're talking Apple. Can I be rude, Paul?
Sure.
Are you going to load the boat on Apple with this pullback?
I'm definitely going to make sure that if I was underweight or not participating and I liked the story, I would be adding to it here. We had a participation already.
So
I mean, she owns it.
Yeah, that's fine. That's
Barron's talk. That's the way Mario Gabelli talks.
Nothing wrong with that. We mentioned the Fed before, probably a little bit more quiescent this year than maybe we had initially thought. What do you think the Fed will do this year?
That's going to depend on a lot of different factors, but right now I think the impetus is to do nothing, is to sort of wait and pause. We'll see what happens next week, but I think that you're going to need to see data on the inflation side come in reasonably good for the Fed to be able to cut more, just because things are going well enough that it seems contradictory to say we're raising our inflation outlook and we're cutting rates.
But aren't these rates nominal or real, quote unquote, normal? We had this great conversation with Greg Peters at PGIM. I mean, a lot of younger people are going, OMG, it's so weird. Is it?
It's not so weird on the back end, on the long end, but on the short end, that seems a little high relative to other things. Okay. So that could be the argument of saying I can bring the short end down a little bit because we want to see that steeper yield curve and that more normalized yield curve. But yes, after a decade of zero, you go back and look, rates at 5% are almost low relative to history, especially on the long end.
Sir, they're tearing up Paul out on YouTube today, out in live chat. He used the word quiescent.
Oh, God. What's happening?
So, like, when you're courtside at Duke, and the first quarter doesn't go well, do you look there and who's the freshman star, Callum?
Cooper Flag.
Connor?
Yeah, Cooper.
Cooper Flag.
Yep.
So do you go, Cooper, you're quiescent?
Yeah, no, that's not going to happen. I'd get thrown out of my seats.
Quiescent?
Yeah, what's happened to me?
Okay, Lisa, he's ruined.
Yep.
That's all there is to it. Sarah, thank you so much. Sarah Hunt on short notice today in the equity markets as we really readjust with Alpine Sachs and futures at -7. With our news in New York City, Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Tom, Paul, Lisa. President Donald Trump is using his first trip since his return to the White House to visit storm-damaged western North Carolina and wildfire-ravaged Los Angeles. Bloomberg tax reporter Zach Cohen says it could be tense when the president meets with California Governor Gavin Newsom.
The tension between presidents of one party and governors of the other in the context of national politics, especially when it comes to disaster aid, is always a fascinating dynamic to watch. I remember Chris Christie welcoming Barack Obama days before the 2012 election to New Jersey during Superstorm Sandy. Now California Governor Gavin Newsom has the same task in front of him as President Donald Trump visited California during these raging wildfires in L.A.
Bloomberg tax reporter Zach Cohen says Trump has threatened to withhold funds for California unless it changes its water policies. A Seattle federal judge appointed by Ronald Reagan has put a 14-day pause on President Trump's executive order ending the 14th Amendment's so-called birthright citizenship. Judge John Kuhnauer ruled quickly after 25 minutes of arguments, saying that the move was blatantly unconstitutional. Loyola Law School professor Jessica Levinson
came to the decision in this speed, which is, he said, blatantly unconstitutional. There's reporting that he said, where were the lawyers in the room?
Professor Jessica Levinson. Defense Secretary nominee Pete Hegseth reportedly paid $50,000 to a woman who accused him of sexual assault in 2017. The news comes as the full Senate votes on his nomination today. Thousands of anti-abortion activists are coming to Washington for the annual March for Life, seeking to build momentum after a string of victories and maintain pressure on legislators. The 52nd March for Life is taking place today, and organizers have estimated around 150,000 marchers will take place. Global news, 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr. This is Bloomberg. Tom, Paul, Lisa.
Michael Barr, thanks so much. Paul, I heard this from Mr. Barr and others. This judge was appointed by Mr. Reagan.
Yeah, wow.
So I'm like, get out the Wikipedia. Good morning. Washington State and the law school there, where senior judge of the district court, John C. Kuhnauer, enjoys daily work at 83 years old.
Good for him.
Amazing.
Man,
absolutely amazing. He's from Pittsburgh, Kansas. I don't know where they
sounds
vote.
like,
they root for the Chiefs.
Yeah,
I know that.
Middle America, big time.
Pittsburgh, Kansas, with some work out of Kansas State, and of course the esteemed University of Iowa as well.
Very good.
But he's sitting on the bench working at 83 years old.
I mean, what are you going to do? I mean, people are living to like forever these days. You got to work, right?
Are you ready? He was nominated 44 years ago.
Good for him.
That's so cool.
Good for him.
Good morning. Good morning, Washington State. Early morning in Washington State on a commute. And, of course, out on YouTube, subscribe to Bloomberg Podcast. You're done with your commute. Migrate over at the house with the fam. Migrate over at the office with office mates. To YouTube for our good conversations here. A lot coming up here this morning. It's Friday. I've forgotten who we have this morning. I'll be honest.
Yeah, a lot of good people.
Jay Bryson.
Yep.
Will be with us. Important discussion on international economics. Futures at -8 from New York City. It's Bloomberg's surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And this Bloomberg Business Flash brought to you by Oracle. Attention growing businesses. Oracle is offering to cut your current cloud bill in half if you move to Oracle Cloud Infrastructure. For new U.S. customers with minimum financial commitment, offer ends March 31st. See if your company qualifies at oracle.com/Bloomberg. All right, we've got futures falling, and this is as President Trump hinted about a softer approach toward tariffs during an interview. We'll start with NASDAQ futures, down 0.1%, 21 points. Dow futures down 0.2%, 109 points. S&P futures down about 0.1% or 8 points. The 2-year yield 4.26%. That's down 1 basis point. The yield on the 10-year 4.64%, and that is little changed. To commodities, we have Brent crude $78 a barrel, WTI crude $75 a barrel, and spot gold higher $2,781 an ounce. Shares of Boeing, they're down about 1%. This is after posting preliminary sales about $1.5 billion below estimates. They have their full earnings report out on Tuesday. Then we go to Texas Instruments, reported sluggish demand for its computer chips. Its shares down 4%, so it's taken a hit there. And then finally, Novo Nordisk, on the flip side, their shares getting a lift. ADR's up 12%, and that's because an experimental shot delivered as much as 22% weight loss. It was an early stage trial. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Lisa Mateo. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and Tom.
Lisa, thanks so much. We do economics here. We're going to get to Jay Bryson, Wells Fargo, an important discussion in a moment. Our economic studies, our economic indicators throughout 2025. Brought to you by IBKR. Will the average U.S. temperature in this January be greater than 34 degrees? Trade your prediction with IBKR Forecast Trader. The yes was recently at 14%. Buy yes or no and earn $1 if you're right. Go to ibkr.com/forecast after you warm up your toes because it's been cold. Yeah. So Jay Bryson's with us now. He's a Tar Heel.
Double Tar Heel.
I should explain this. I mean, double Tar Heel. It's like Tar Heels. We have to do Tar Heels because Sweeney had a tantrum once and demanded no Tar Heels. And Peter from Connecticut called in and said, I don't think so.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
that's where we are. Good morning, Peter from Connecticut, for having Jay Bryson on this morning. Jay, I hate you. You have the best Excel spreadsheet. It reminds me of Deutsche Bank spreadsheets from years ago, and I got to get out the surveillance spectacles to read the damn thing because the font is so small. Here's the summary, Jay Bryson. The unemployment rate really doesn't go up, 4.2-ish peak, and your nominal GDP run rate, even with a slow summer this year, is 4.8 or even 5-ish. What does the Fed do with the Jay Bryson optimism, the resilience of this American economy?
I don't think the Fed does much here, Tom. We would see them cutting a little bit later on this year, but I think they're on hold for an extended period of time. Just this, right now, the CPI inflation or the PCE inflation rate remains up well above their 2% target. I just don't see them cutting with the labor market holding up pretty well.
So bring this over to the securities analysis of the Wells Fargo team. If we get a Jay Bryson Excel spreadsheet like I see, am I right? Corporations mint money?
We think that it's going to be a pretty decent year in terms of profit growth. Yeah. Now, I think a lot of it's really going to depend upon the tariffs, and we have some tariffs that are kind of built in there, some tariff assumptions rather, but that's only an assumption at this point. We'll see how all that stuff plays out. But I would think that, in general, this is going to be a pretty decent year for the U.S. economy. The underlying fundamentals of the economy today remain quite strong.
Jay, how did you and your team at Wells Fargo analyze the potential for trade tariffs coming out of this new administration?
Yeah, so Tom, Paul, that's a really good question. I mean, so if you go back to what candidate Trump was saying over the summer, 10% universal tariff with 60% applied to China. Okay, so we ran that through our model, and what you get is a pretty significant decline or slowing in real GDP growth, and a considerable bump up in the inflation rate. So what we said is, all right, do we want to adopt that 100% as our operating assumption? And the answer is no, because there's some sort of probability, right? So what we said is, okay, okay, so maybe half of this goes into effect, and maybe it's more towards the second half of the year than the first half of the year. So that's how we kind of thought about it, and that's what our model is. Now, clearly, if tomorrow the president announces 10% across the board, 60% on China, then we're going to have to take our GDP numbers down, push our inflation forecast up. Conversely, if he says, okay, we're not going to do anything in terms of tariffs, then we got to push our GDP number up and our inflation number down. So there's always uncertainty as it relates to economic outlooks. Right now, that uncertainty is a little bit higher.
All right, so given that uncertainty here, how do you kind of gauge the U.S. consumer these days?
So in general, I would say the U.S. consumer is fine, right? And I don't think the U.S. consumer is going to react to the potential for tariffs. Now, we know that companies kind of do, right? If you think, if you're a company, you think your imports may be tariffed, you start to bring some of that buying forward to get it in underneath the tariffs. But consumers don't really react until the actual tariffs go into effect, until they actually see the price increases. And so, at this point, and when we look at everything we look at in terms of the consumer, whether it's the labor market, whether it's retail sales, whatever, that all points to a really healthy consumer sector right now.
Jay, the heritage of what you do, of Wells Fargo, and, forget about the stagecoach across the tundra and all that, just the national scope of Wells Fargo economics has always been a measurement of the desire of Americans to be employed. How polarized is America right now of the haves and the have-nots in the American labor economy?
Yeah, there's a lot of different ways I could answer that, Tom. And I guess, first of all, if you start with income inequality in the country, that's the highest it's been probably in 40 some years right now. And then in terms of the jobs, and I think part of that income inequality reflects, I don't want to say inequality in the labor market, but it's a skills gap in the labor market. If you are somebody who has some technical abilities, you're highly employable right now. Not so much if you don't have some of those technical abilities. Now, that said, I think we're going to be looking at a tight labor market for the foreseeable future. So people, I think, will be employed, but I think what's going to happen as you go forward is those wage gaps will continue to widen out. People who have the skills that could be transferred into technological sort of stuff and AI and things of that nature, those people are going to gain significantly. And the people who don't have those skills, they may still be employed, but their wages aren't going to go up to the same extent as the people who have those skills.
Can you, Paul, I don't mean to interrupt, but I just think this is incredibly important. Can you see at the Kennan Memorial Stadium, Chapel Hill, North Carolina, September 1, Jay Bryson's at the 50-yard line?
Sure he is.
For Belichick against the TCU Horned Frogs?
Go Heels.
Jay, it's amazing. I can't believe I'm saying that.
I know.
Bill Belichick against the TCU Horned Frogs.
Yeah, I know, right? It's no longer, the ACC and the conferences that we kind of grew up with, right? There's all these super sorts of things going on, but yeah.
ESPN 7:30. Sure. You think the cameras will be on that?
Oh, absolutely. Jay, how excited is the Tar Heel community about Coach Belichick?
I think we're really excited, right? So my own personal opinion here is I think it's a little bimodal. I think Coach Belichick will do really, really well there, or he won't do really well. Okay. So again, it's very, very bimodal. Why would he do well? Right. Because of his recruiting, right? If you're an aspiring college football, aspiring NFL player, you probably want to coach for a guy who's won 6 bowl, right? On the other hand, coaching a 32-year-old professional man is a lot different than coaching a 18-year-old boy, right? And so that's where I don't know his connectivity with that.
Really, really well said. Dr. Bryson, thank you so much. Of course, forever with Wells Fargo. Duke Blue Devils, UNC football, TBA.
TBA, okay.
Not announced yet. I'm
Okay,
sorry.
that's all right.
Such a what? It's going to be at UNC.
Yep.
What happens when it's at UNC? Do like 12,000 people
Yeah, we
move 11 miles?
Yeah, it's 11 miles. 15501 is the road between Durham and Chapel Hill. You drive down 15501. You might stop at a Cracker Barrel and get a Country Boy breakfast.
The barrel to
game.
crack.
Sure.
You know,
absolutely.
yeah.
You might do that. Maybe Wells Fargo or something, and then you go in the Keene Stadium.
Out on YouTube, they're asking, has Lisa Mateo ever been to a Cracker Barrel?
That would be yes, but I wouldn't go back.
Harsh.
She asked for the fruit bowl and they escorted her out.
Yes, I was escorted out
Did
the
she
door.
shop on the way out? Futures at -9 to VIX, 15.08. It's a Friday. It's a warming America. Stay with us on YouTube. Subscribe to Bloomberg Podcast. This is Bloomberg Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
In the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. We're coming off a record-setting day on Wall Street after President Trump said he's going to push OPEC to lower oil prices and also push the Fed to lower interest rates. But this morning, what's falling are futures. NASDAQ futures down 0.1%, 30 points. Dow futures down 0.2%, 112 points. S&P futures down 0.1%, or 9 points. We have the two-year yield, 4.27%, down 1 basis point. The yield on the 10-year, 4.64%, and that is little change. We have the Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index down about 0.3%. Brent crude, $78 a barrel. WTI crude, $74 a barrel. We have some stuff on the economic calendar for today. S&P Global's report on manufacturing, services, PMI, also a read on sentiment and existing home sales later this morning. And then we have companies making news. That's Tesla. It's going to release a software update for about 1.2 million cars in China. It's to fix a power steering and rear view camera issue. And on another note, Tesla also launching a refreshed version of the Model Y SUV in the U.S. and Europe. Comes 2 weeks after introducing it in China. And finally, the first data center associated with that $100 billion Stargate venture from OpenAI, SoftBank, Oracle. Well, it's finally taken shape. It's being built on an 875-acre site in Texas. That's about the size of Central Park. Yeah, it's reportedly offering only 57 jobs to start. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and Tom.
Lisa, thanks so much. This book is set on my desk. It's The Great Inflation Resurgence. I want to get to it in a moment. This is really going to be an important discussion for those of you worried about inflation. First, though, Bloomberg Surveillance this morning brought to you by New Jersey Institute of Technology, NJIT. They make engineers, architects, scientists. They make computer programmers, business leaders, designers, and STEM professionals across every field. Learn more at njit.edu/success. njit.edu/success. And we welcome New Jersey Institute of Technology, truly a heritage supporter of what we do here. Callum Henderson, for years, was definitive in international economics. You get upset. He'd throw out a 12-page wonder, and you'd be, oh, damn, I got to read this. He was that good. He's teamed up with Thomas Harr of the Denmark Central Bank to write a lovely, short, focused treatise on your fear of inflation. Dr. Harr joins us right now, chief economist, head of all of economics for the Central Bank of Denmark, Denmark's national bank. Is this 1960s inflation? Is this the inflation that our parents or some of us older lived, Dr. Harr?
No, thanks a lot for being on the show, Tom. And I don't think it is so. I think what happened, and that's what we talk a lot about at length in the book, is there was these extraordinary shock, and there was extraordinary, you can say, fiscal and monetary policy. A lot of differences between the different regions. We describe both the US, Europe, and Asia, but that happened. But what was a key difference compared to the 60s and 70s was, for example, that inflation expectations did not rise to the same extent. And therefore, that was one of the key reasons why inflation came back down. But clearly, there are a lot of uncertainties out there, and have to talk about that.
The heart of the matter in the fear of every sentence of Jerome Powell's press conference is the fear of central banks unanchored. Are we threatened that we could be unanchored in these tumultuous times?
I think, all central banks are monitoring this extremely closely. And clearly, when you look at the last, and that's what the book is about, the 2021-22 burst of inflation, we did see on the short-term inflation expectations that they rise somewhat, but the longer term still was, you can say, surprisingly or at least noteworthy resilient. But we are monitoring this extremely closely to see whether there are any signs of de-anchoring. But so far, they are not, in my view. And that's also what we talk about in the book.
Tomas, the discussion these days, just in the last week or so here in the U.S., has been about tariffs. From your perspective, what is their impact on inflation? How do you think about that relationship?
No, I think there is a difference between whether you look at it from a U.S. perspective or whether you look at it from a world perspective. But because one of the points we're actually making in the book is that inflation is to a very large extent a global phenomenon. But I would say, and that's always a danger of saying this time is different, but I think if you look at the tariffs issue, I think it's very difficult to not see it as at least short-term somewhat inflationary for the U.S. And by that way also some of the other things which could come out of the new administration. But I would say in terms of for the rest of the world, I would say less so, because what it could be, you can say, a negative supply shock for the US in terms of tariffs will be a negative demand shock for Europe and Asia. And therefore, I would say the spillover of that in terms of inflationary, it's very, very uncertain. Of course, also depends on what happens to the dollar. But overall, I would think that it would be more limited in terms of the global spillovers from that than what we saw in 21-22.
Thomas Harr, I would be remiss if I didn't pull an audible here for our American commuters, those on YouTube nationwide. The Bank of Denmark rides herd on all the research capabilities of Greenland. And I don't want to get into a debate about who's going to end up with Greenland here, but I do want to ask simply, what's the number one thing in the Danish Central Bank's research on Greenland that you would like to convey to our American audience?
We do some analysis on Greenland. We will actually quite soon come out with a new analysis on Greenland. But that you can look out for. I think it will be out in a couple of months, just published from the central banks, purely on the economic outlook for Greenland. We are updating this on a quite regular basis, and that will come out, as I said, in a couple of months' time.
We'll have to have you back on for that. Or I think maybe Paul, spring in Copenhagen. Sure, no problem. Can you see Michael Barr, floating around the harbor, looking at the statue out in the harbor?
Oh, I'll be floating all right.
Okay. Thomas Harr, thank you so much, and congratulations on your book with Callum, Henderson, The Inflation Resurgence. We greatly appreciate it today. Dr. Harr is with the Denmark Central Bank. Futures deteriorated a little bit. When was the last time I said futures deteriorate?
Been several days.
It was like, we were getting over our hangover on New Year's Eve. Futures at -10. With our news in New York City, Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Tom, Paul, Lisa. President Donald Trump is heading to hurricane-battered western North Carolina and wildfire-ravaged Los Angeles. Trump has criticized the Biden administration for its handling of Hurricane Helene in North Carolina and suggested withholding money from California unless it changes water policies. President Trump says he'd rather not impose tariffs on China. At the same time, he tells Fox News host Sean Hannity. They hold a tremendous power over the world's second biggest economy. Tina Fordham, founder of Fordham Global Foresight, says China and others are not likely to take those threats lying down.
Market participants are also underestimating retaliation and at various levels, right? It need not be purely tariffs and economic weapons. It can be more of these gray zone activities and other efforts to undermine U.S. power.
Tina Fordham with Fordham Global Foresight was a guest on Bloomberg Daybreak. U.S. officials say active duty military troops arrived in El Paso, Texas, and in San Diego last night. They are the first batch of 1,500 new forces being deployed to secure the southern border after President Trump's executive order demanding an immediate crackdown on immigration. Trump declared a national emergency at the U.S. border with Mexico, vowing to halt all illegal border crossings. Elizabeth Goitein is the senior director with the Brennan Center's Liberty and National Security Program.
They are designed to give the president more flexibility in these sudden, unexpected situations that are moving too quickly for Congress to act. That's clearly not unlawful immigration, which has been a problem for a long time. It's something that Congress can and should address.
Elizabeth Goitein is with the Brennan Center. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg. Tom, Paul, Lisa.
Michael Barr, thanks so much. And now surveillance movie critic El Mateo and Paul Sweeney on the Oscars. I didn't think it made all that much splash. I mean, I didn't hear people at home debating Gladiator versus Wizard like last year. It was really an engaged conversation. Am I
I think
right?
they've gone back to where the Academy typically plays, which is in these art house films, as opposed to the commercially successful films, where we had a little bit of that last year. Now they've gone back to kind of their wheelhouse, which is, what's Best Picture? I mean, you know, where
yeah,
there's
there's Brutalist, but then you have like The Wicked too. I mean, Wicked was a huge box office success. That's in there too. My daughter's pushing for that one, but but yeah, that's what you're seeing. Like
It's
some of
not
the,
as
the names
engaged
come
as
out,
last
you know,
year.
and you're like, who? I didn't see that. I don't even remember that being in theaters. So it's a little bit tough.
It's okay. We've assigned Michael Barr to watch all 10 Oscars.
Get back to us on Monday.
Gone with the wind. There we go.
We figure with the Lions losing, you've got lots of time to watch The Brutalist or whatever. It's Bloomberg Surveillance.
This is Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney on Bloomberg Radio.
Good morning, everyone. Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney sliding through the day. We want to get a couple minutes here. Just a quick with Jane Foley, head of foreign exchange strategy. Saravelos on earlier from Deutsche Bank.
Yep.
And to me, this is me, folks. I'm saying, look, the dollar matters. And Jane Foley at Rabobank, what's so important to me is we're deep into January. And am I right? We have dollar stability?
Well, it would certainly appear so this week. Clearly, the market was extremely concerned about what Trump would bring on that first week after his inauguration. And in terms of tariffs, well, we haven't had any. So therefore, there is relief. There is some backtracking on some of that dollar strength. But I think we all know that we have got volatility coming. We all know that we are all waiting, for the next comment by Trump. And we all know, I think, that tariffs are still on the cards, even though they weren't on the first day of his presidency. So I think the volatility is still to come.
Talk to us about the Japanese yen here. What is the Bank of Japan thinking these days?
Well, it's what is the Bank of Japan thinking against what is the market thinking about the yen. And we have the interest rate hike today as expected. Now, I think the Bank of Japan were a little bit more hawkish than expected. They did, after all, revised up their CPI forecasts and also talked again about, the fact that interest rates, can come again if the economy plays out as they expect. But the market has been reluctant really to push the yen significantly higher, even on that more hawkish take, even though the market now is thinking, you know what, they could hike again as soon as July. And I think, in terms of dollar yen, it's been on an uptrend really since early 2021, and the market's reluctant to let that go. It's still anticipating, weakness in the Japanese economy, still, of course, it potentially thinking that there could be tariffs. But, I think the relationship between Japan and the US is a special one. Japan has not been mentioned by Trump in terms of tariffs this week at all, in contrast to, Mexico or China or Canada or the EU. And I think, Japan does have a pretty strong hand. And of course, we are out of deflation. The Bank of Japan governor now is talking about that period in the past tense. And that really does change the landscape in terms of investment.
It does. David Rosenberg publishing in Toronto today of deflation to come, or excuse me, disinflation to come for Canada as well. Jane Foley, one final question after all the, Davos, Lagarde was on fire, et cetera, in that. Does Europe want a weak euro to solve its problems?
Well, it may not be able to solve the problems, but it can certainly offer a crutch whilst it tries to solve those structural issues. Now, one simple question back to you, if you were, Volkswagen right now, what would you want? A weaker yen if you're facing perhaps
I'd bring back the Beetle with a stick shift. That's what I learned on.
Well, I used to drive one of those too. So we still have stick shift here. I still drive one, Tom. But I think, a softer euro would certainly allow some space for those big German companies. I mean, they're facing huge structural issues with the energy transition. Energy costs are so high. They've got for demographics, a shortage of labor. And that relationship with China has really changed. And that's big headwind for some of the German exporters. So, I think a weaker yen could really help them.
Too short a visit. Jane Foley, thank you so much. I just had a nightmare vision. Lisa Mateo, birthday girl. This is, she's 39. I mean, this is a few years ago. You had a VW bus. Did you really listen to the James Gang in your VW bus?
No, but we had the VW Bug. We did have it.
Did you?
We did have it. Squished all the kids in there when we drove off in the VW
With that
Bug.
Titanic heating system.
Yes.
It'd be like 5 below zero, and my father go, it'll heat up by Buffalo, trust me.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I could just see her in a VW bus.
I could, absolutely. I think
the new one is nice.
It is. That does look nice. They did a nice job with the new one. But anyway, I had to give up my stick shift, which I'd driven my whole life a couple of years ago. BMW stopped making them in my 5 Series. So crushed, and I have to go back to automatic.
Our highlight this week was a wonderful ceremony. It took ages to choreograph in celebration of our 1-year anniversary here. And we got some trophy from YouTube. It's like the silver plaque.
Very nice. 100,000 subscribers.
Yeah, thank you out on YouTube as we build that each and every day. Trust me, the foundation of it has been Lisa Mateo. Celebrate her birthday.
This is Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney.
I'm sorry, it's a boom economy, and that's what we're adjusting to.
Neither party seems to want to take on deficits at all.
With Lisa Mateo on markets.
Stocks are coming off of another record high.
And Michael Barr with news.
Tensions between the U.S. and China have heated up even more.
The best in economics, finance, investment, and international relations. This is Bloomberg Surveillance on Bloomberg Radio.
Good morning, everyone. Tom Keene, Paul Sweeney. It is a Friday, and we are looking at the markets into a huge earnings season next week. Some earnings today, American Express, among others, but a huge tech week coming into 29, Microsoft, and 30, I believe it is, Apple. Computer markets finally off the bid today. Futures -8, but the VIX quiescent, as Paul Sweeney would say, 14.98. We haven't even talked about yields here. Yields are churning. What's the mortgage rate doing, Paul?
Still around 7%. So it's a number that a lot of people don't like to see. They need a six handle. A low six handle is what we hear from some of the real estate folks to say to get people moving.
People talk about inflation, and I saw some rent charts. Somebody maybe Mohammed had a great rent chart. Like rents in the West and the South are down.
Yeah.
Some of the multifamily
They've
issues
gone crazy for a long time.
as well. Bloomberg surveillance this morning. We're brought to you by Oppenheimer. Oppenheimer, they focus the power of their thinking on you, creating customized plans to help achieve your goals. Put the power of Oppenheimer thinking into your investing, wealth management, capital markets, investment banking. Thank you, Oppenheimer, for your support today. Futures at negative. And right now from the Interactive Broker Studios, a Bloomberg Business Flash. Lisa Mateo.
Yeah, we've still got red on the screen. The dollar dropping to a 1-month low on top of that. And this is after President Trump seemed to kind of soften his approach toward tariffs on China. That was during an interview. We'll start with NASDAQ futures. They're down about 0.1%, 24 points. Dow futures down 0.2%, 88 points. S&P futures down 0.1% or 8 points. We have the 2-year yield, 4.27%, down 1 basis point. The yield on the 10-year, 4.64%, and that is little change. To currencies, I have to point out the Japanese yen because the BOJ hiked its key rate, and that's fueling some expectations for more rate hikes. So right now we have the Japanese yen at 156.36 against the dollar. Move over to the euro, up 0.5%. Same for the British pound, and Bitcoin up more than 2% at just above 105,000. To earnings we go. We'll start with Verizon. They reported a beat on earnings expectation. Verizon shares are up about 1%. Then we go to American Express. Reported profits increasing 12% due to higher than expected spending on cards during the holidays. But its shares just dropped. It's down about 0.5%. And this, of course, comes ahead of a big week for tech earnings. Names like Microsoft, Meta, Tesla, Apple, all posting results next week. Stay tuned for that. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and Tom.
Lisa, thanks so much. Okay, there was the hat at the inauguration.
Uh-oh.
But I'm sorry, trophy taking was Usha in the pink outfit.
Oh, yeah?
The vice president's wife.
Oh, okay.
Killed it.
Is that right? Okay,
Took
I'll have to
home
go
the
back and take a look.
trophy.
I'll go back.
Joining us now, fashion editor for CBS, Margaret Brennan, of course, Face the Nation on Sunday. Margaret, I assume it'll be a 4-hour Face the Nation. The news flow is absolutely extraordinary. You've got J.D. Vance. What's your first question to the vice president?
I'm not going to tell you that. I also have to figure it out. There's so much, right? Where do you begin?
Yeah, where do you begin?
In a finite amount of time. But this is the first interview since J.D. Vance was sworn in as Vice President of the United States. It was a big and busy week, as you said. It's sort of flood the zone, overwhelm the system with the executive orders, even though the judicial system already stepping in to halt a few of them. But we want to understand what's coming next.
I want to look at the film and see, and can I just say, and I'm not making this up, folks, you look at 47 YouTube channels, and CBS had the best live feed out of their Los Angeles station, which I can't remember the letters, K whatever. But Margaret Brennan, CBS covering the Florida fires. This president has to go into enemy territory, I believe today, and greet the governor, greet the mayor in Los Angeles. What will CBS look for there with your local affiliate?
Well, the promise Mr. Trump made was that he's going to be a president for all Americans and unify the country. So the 5th largest economy in the world is the state of California, pretty important to the U.S. economy. He's going to have to represent all of America. But we will see when he goes out to California how he communicates, because he's already been very public about his disdain for Gavin Newsom, the governor of that state. Gavin Newsom, no fan of his either. So we will see. It's KCAL, our local affiliate out there in LA you're talking about. He will also go to North Carolina, which, as you recall, was just hit pretty hard in a inland area, not at all used to hurricanes. And he's going to visit that disaster zone. But it raises questions about how much aid is needed, when it will be deployed. We also don't really know yet who's running FEMA and some of those agencies for Donald Trump. So perhaps we'll get answers to that.
So, Margaret, I know you and your producers, it's a fire hose of news coming out of Washington, D.C. in this White House. Other than the vice president, how are you going to try to structure your show this weekend? What will be your focus?
You're right. It is overwhelming, I'm sure, for a lot of people. It's overwhelming for the reporters. And we want to be able to just sort of curate and bottom line it for people. Shock and awe was what we were promised. And that is sort of a marketing tactic to just say, hey, look, I'm doing a lot of stuff here. Okay. Well, how about what does it actually mean? So we're going to try to bottom line it. That's my intent for Sunday. We've got Jan Crawford, our Supreme Court reporter, who's so good at this and handicapping where this heads next legally in terms of the flurry of executive orders, including the one that challenges the 14th Amendment to the Constitution. We will have our Scott McFarland talk through the judicial system and what some of these pardons mean in terms of the law enforcement system. And Camila Montoya Galvez, who is, in my belief, is the best immigration reporter in the business right now, talk us through what is happening at the border and with immigration.
Margaret, one final question. And I just look at the news flow. It's absolutely extraordinary. Do you just assume the government is going to be run out of 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue? Is that like where we're heading?
I would assume Mar-a-Lago, really, more than 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. Look, this is the thing. Is this is what's going to be intellectually interesting to watch? Donald Trump last time also promised to be a disruptor, so he's disrupting. But really, he's stress testing once again the checks and balances. So already challenging the judicial branch, already challenging the legislative branch, which is kind of limping along under Republican majority. And we're going to talk to Mike Turner actually about some of that on Sunday. If you remember, he longtime guest on Face the Nation, chair of the House Intelligence Committee, was just ousted from that role by the Speaker of the House. Turner told me it was because of concerns from Mar-a-Lago. We'll talk to him about what that means, because certainly Congress is intended and meant by the founding fathers to be an independent branch of checks and balances. So the president's not supposed to be telling the Speaker exactly what to do. They have to figure out the politics of the possible. So we'll talk through all of that Sunday.
Margaret Brennan, Face the Nation with the Vice President of the United States. Look for that across the CBS television network Sunday morning on Bloomberg Radio, 2 p.m. Face the Nation. Listen to Face the Nation Sunday, 2 p.m. in New York, in Washington, D.C., and 92.9 in Boston as well. Face the Nation this Sunday at 2 on Bloomberg Radio. As we talk of Los Angeles and the president's attempt there, Jeffrey Cleveland, hugely well-timed, with Payton and Rigel, chief economist, out of L.A. as well. Jeffrey, I was thunderstruck 4, 5, 6 days ago how the basic feel was, with these horrific fires, Hollywood is back to work. Is that the tone you see in your Los Angeles?
Well, yeah, Tom, LA is an interesting place, right? It's a big sprawl. It is, many overlapping jurisdictions. So the fires definitely affected certain areas, but other areas it seems like life went on just like before, just like normal. So it's an interesting place to live.
What do you see on tariffs? We interview, Paul, who do we interview from Long Beach, the head of the Los Angeles ports?
Oh, Gene Soroka.
Thank you. Gene Soroka, we talk to maybe once every 6 months. I mean, what do you see on tariffs, Jeffrey Cleveland, is the entryway for Pacific imports?
Yeah, so I guess our big view is that the market is overestimating the impacts of any kind of new tariffs on inflation. We didn't see a great amount of inflation in 2017, 18, 19 when tariffs were introduced. We view tariffs more as a sort of a VAT tax, a drag on growth, if you will, Tom, not an inflationary story. So that's probably a big area where the market has been getting it wrong. I think we're sort of in an inflation scare right now, where people are much more worried about inflation reaccelerating and inflation being an issue than we think they should be. And tariffs are definitely a part of that. So I think that's key to take in.
Tom, a red headline just crossing the Bloomberg terminal here. Mark Zuckerberg says Meta 2025 CapEx will be $60 to $65 billion. The estimate from Wall Street, $51 billion. So the tech spending on this AI thing It is just
This is Dan Ives earlier, and I, off the top of my head, Microsoft was out 2 weeks ago with an 80 billion large.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Jeffrey, we step back here, and you think about this economy here. What's the call here for 2025 here? I mean, in terms of GDP growth, how much did your GDP call change at all with the election and Mr. Trump assuming the White House?
No, we think there's a lot of noise. So we've seen that so far. In week one of the administration, a lot of executive orders signed, but not a lot of big economic policy changes. Something that would make us change, our thinking on the trajectory of the U.S. economy would be, some sort of fiscal package or a tax change, whether that be corporate tax cut, personal income tax cut. That stuff is going to take more work than just the stroke of a pen. The Republicans have a very slim, control of the House. So things like that are going to be more difficult to implement. And so we haven't changed our forecast. So we have 2% growth for this year, which is still, I would say, trend-like GDP growth. The biggest part of our forecast is, as I hinted at earlier, inflation is going to continue to moderate. We think by Q3, guys, we'll be back closer to 2% on core PCE on a trailing 12-month basis.
Wow.
Yes, that is the key. That if that happens, as I can tell by the tone of your voice, that would be huge for bonds and in stocks as well.
Is the market now pricing in the paid and Regal guess? I mean, is this up in the market? To me, it's not.
No.
It's about earnings.
Not at
OMG, we're delivering.
No, you wouldn't have me on if the market was pricing this in. I think probably the biggest thing that came out this week was that new tenant rent index that the BLS put out on the 21st. I mean, that shows that with the lag, the rent inflation in CPI and quite frankly, housing overall in core inflation should continue to cool off. And I think that's going to have a big effect on core inflation. I don't think people are paying enough attention to that, Tom. Yep.
What about the BLS labor revisions next week? We had Anna Wong on, I think, 48 hours ago, and others really looking. Paul, as I recall, non-farm payrolls an 80,000 adjustment per month across the year. Are you with that, Jeffrey Cleveland?
Well, we do think that the labor market is softening. I think if you look at the Payton and Regal chart of the week out today, we looked at continuing claims. Those have continued to creep up, 1.9 million in the latest reading. That tends to lead the unemployment rate. So we're seeing a softer labor market, and it's nothing like we saw in 2022. So things have cooled off. But again, to me, that tells me the threat from labor market driving inflation has diminished, and we're closer to that soft landing story. We're not seeing a collapse in job growth, but it is slower job growth indeed.
So given that backdrop, Jeffrey, what do you expect this Federal Reserve to do this year?
I think they're going to cut more times than people think at this point. So the market has 41 basis points of implied cuts right now through the year. I think they could end up going 3 or 4 times this year. So more or less once per quarter. Obviously, they'll sit on their hands next week. They'll see. And if I'm right on that inflation data, that will be the key. We heard from Governor Waller last week. Contingent upon inflation data, they're still in the cutting game. And I think right now the bond market is not paying attention to that, guys.
So what's your yield call? We got price down, yield up. Where's the Sweeney yield? The 2 years. Margaret Patel said.
Sure, 4.27.
4.27.
Sure.
What's your 10-year call, Jeffrey?
Yes, we have 10 years going to 360 by the end of the year. Yeah, it's driven by 3 things, Tom. Inflation is huge. Inflation is a big driver of 10-year yields, as you know.
What do your clients say when you say that? I mean, it's like Bob Michael on steroids.
They say, what about tariffs? What about Trump? What about the fiscal situation? And we say, yeah, we're hearing all that. But you know what really matters for longer term rates? Inflation. If inflation does cool, and as we talked about, shelters being a big part of that, rents have been a big part of that. If those components continue to cool, inflation will cool off towards 2%, and that'll drag down 10-year yields. If the Fed cuts a little bit, that'll drag down 10-year yields. And I've heard so much, probably more than any time in my career, about the fiscal side of the idea that we could have a fiscal calamity. The bond vigilantes are coming back. So the term premium has widened out, but it's possible that will settle down this year. And all those factors, Tom, lead you to a lower 10-year Treasury yield in a year's time.
Jeffrey, you're based in Los Angeles. Are you guys going to get some rain this weekend?
God willing. Yeah, we've been, as of through yesterday, I'll give you my up-to-date weather report here. We were still seeing a lot of wind, which is worrisome, which creates the fire conditions. But if it's possible, we'll get some rain over the weekend, perhaps on Sunday, and then that will be great news for everyone around here. Yes.
President Trump traveling to Los Angeles today. He's not going out there to see Gavin Newsom. He's going out there to see Jeffrey Cleveland. Of
course he is.
Who's got Donald Trump's favorite yield call.
Yes.
He'll love that. Downtown LA, Payton and Regal offices. We welcome the number 45 and number 47.
Jeffrey Cleveland, thank you so much. With Payton and Regal, that is a wow call, folks. Yeah. Remember that one as we go through the weeks and months here for Jeffrey Cleveland to a 360 on the 10-year yield. Red and green on the screen. NASDAQ up fractionally. With our news in New York City, Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Tom, Paul, Lisa. And let's talk more about those wildfires. California Governor Gavin Newsom signed legislation directing $2.5 billion for response and recovery efforts.
I'm honored, thank you, to sign these two bills appropriating $2.5 billion effective immediately to the communities impacted by these wildfires.
President Donald Trump plans to travel to Los Angeles today to survey the fire damage after criticizing Governor Newsom's response to the disaster. Trump will also head to hurricane-battered western North Carolina. President Trump said he'd prefer not to impose tariffs on China while maintaining them as a threat in an interview with Fox News host Sean Hannity. We get more from Bloomberg tax reporter Zach Cohen in Washington.
I mean, this has been the underlying tension of Trump's tariff agenda, both in his first term and now in his second. When he was talking to Fox News host Sean Hannity last night, he said, look, we have one very big power over China, that's tariffs. They don't want them. I'd rather not have to use them, but it's a tremendous power over China, unquote.
Bloomberg, Zach Cohen in the nation's capital. President Trump's nominee for Defense Secretary, Pete Hegseth, has the support of nearly all Republican senators. He faces a confirmation vote today, but there is some GOP resistance. Senator Lisa Murkowski writing his lack of judgment is unbecoming of someone who would lead our armed forces. In particular, the four-term Republican is pointing to Hegseth's admitted infidelity and allegations of excessive drinking. Now, according to several media reports, Hegseth paid $50,000 to a woman who accused him of sexual assault in 2017 as part of their settlement agreement. Hegseth denies that he assaulted her, saying it was consensual. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it. With Bloomberg News Now, I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg. Tom, Paul, Lisa.
Michael Barr, thanks so much. Paul Sweeney, there's an ambiguity to all this, and it is multivariable. It's about job formation. It's about economic growth. But the blunt instrument of a Payton and Regal 3.60 10-year yield, I'm trying to fathom what that does on the corridor from 99.1 Washington up to 92.9 Boston.
Right.
What that does to, I'm using this word as an amateur, folks, to the velocity of real estate sales and rents. I can't imagine.
Yeah, I'm looking at the Mortgage Bankers Association 30-year rate here, fixed rate, 7.02%. Just back in September, October, it was down below 6.2%, so it's had a big move higher. A lot of the real estate folks that we talk to, Tom, they say, if you want to get people out of their houses, putting it on the market, creating some inventory of existing homes, that mortgage rate's got to come down to low sixes at least. We used to say it needs to get to the fives, but maybe the market's kind of recalibrated to a higher for longer. But something in the low sixes is kind of what we're hearing from some of the experts. Because right now you're sitting in your house 2%, 3%, 4% mortgage, and you want to go move down to Florida or something like that.
Nobody wants to move.
And the mortgage rate's 7%. Yeah. That's tough.
Unbelievable. We're going to drive forward this conversation. We'll get Bob Michael in from J.P. Morgan. I assume he's joining us the Fed Day here at the end of January, but maybe we can do something with him or his team as well. And also, Ian Lingen is on the date calendar, someone all of Global Wall Street knows. We're going to do an extended conversation with Ian Lingen early next week. His yield vector is very much like what we heard from economist Cleveland of Payton and Regal. That is a stunning statement of 3.60, hinged off collapsing. It's probably too strong a word, but a disinflationary real estate market. I got green on the screen for the NASDAQ. Why am I not surprised? It's Bloomberg surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And this features report sponsored by IBKR. Will U.S. oil production exceed 13.61 million barrels per day for November 2024? You can trade your prediction with IBKR Forecast Trader. The yes, well, it was recently at 35%. Buy yes or no and earn $1 if you're right. Go to ibkr.com/forecast. All right, well, we've got futures, a little bit of mixed and red and green on the screen, and this is after a record-setting day on Wall Street. S&P 500 closing at a fresh all-time high. Texas Instruments kind of weighing on NASDAQ futures a bit. This is after the chipmaker's quarterly outlook didn't really impress investors. Its shares are down about 4%. So we'll start with NASDAQ futures, up just a tick right now. Dow futures down 0.2%, 116 points. S&P futures, little change, down about 2. We head to the 2-year yield, 4.28%, down 1 basis point. The yield on the 10-year, 4.65%, and that is little change. We have the Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index down 0.3%. Want to point out Bitcoin is trading over 105,000. That's after President Trump, he signed that executive order to support the cryptocurrency industry. That's the reason for that. Shares of Boeing down 1%, racked up bigger losses and generated less revenue than expected. And finally, Novo Nordisk getting a lift, ADRs up 11%. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News now, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Lisa Mateo. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and Tom.
Lisa, thanks so much. Spending a lot of time today thinking about the new allocation within Margaret Brennan, I'm serious, she's doing a 4-hour Fascination this Sunday. The news flow is extraordinary. Joining us at the kitchen table this morning is Victoria Fernandez, Chief Market Strategist and arbiter of allocation debates at homes across Texas with Crossmark Global Investments. What's the biggest debate, Victoria, people are having as they try to allocate forward?
Yeah, really, when we're talking to our clients, the number one question we're getting is what we think is going to happen with inflation, and therefore, where do they want to put their money to work? Do they want to keep it in the bond market? Do they want to move it into certain sectors of equities? I mean, you were just having that discussion about a 360 10-year. I almost fell out of my chair hearing that a few moments ago. That's just not our outlook that we have. We think inflation will probably stay above where the Fed wants it to be, yes, but maybe right around where it is, a little bit lower, pretty sticky. So we think yields are going to stay a little bit higher. That means leadership right now, financials, industrials, we think they're going to continue to have leadership going forward. So we would continue to put money to work there. Not saying that there's not going to be some times when there's going to be a little bit of change. I think we're going to have some liquidity injections coming in during the debt ceiling debate. That can change leadership, but it's going to be tactical. It's not going to be long term.
Victoria, we know you're a native of Houston, Texas, the great city of Houston. You're based there now. Did we see some snow in Texas recently? How did you guys deal with that?
Paul, we are not made for this kind of weather. I am telling you, I've been stuck in my house for 2 days because of the snow. The whole city shuts down. We don't know what to do with this stuff.
Lisa, hold on. How much snow, perchance, is on the Fernandez back porch, nestled up in a drift against the window of the patio door?
So we went and measured. We got 4 inches of snow.
Oh, my God. Should we get Rob Carolyn in?
I can handle 105-degree heat with humidity. I can't handle snow and 20-degree weather. It's just not what we're made for here.
Yeah, we understand. We understand. Hopefully it'll warm up for you guys. So, Victoria, we had 2 years in the stock market where John Tucker's 401k was up over 20% each year. What do you tell your clients?
Still not back to, 07 levels.
Exactly. So what do you tell your clients about 2025 in terms of expectations for returns?
Yeah, we think people need to bring their expectations back a little bit. I mean, we came into this year, high valuations. We're 22 times, a little over 22 times right now. Very high sentiment, bull versus bear ratio, quite high. So a lot of elements starting the year at a very high level. And we think, right now, the path of least resistance is probably higher for the market, but not at 24%, 25%. We're looking at something maybe mid-single digits, low double digits for the year, but a lot of volatility built in there. We've had really high expectations for the new administration coming in for business-friendly elements. That's been priced into the market, but that usually kind of stops right around Inauguration Day. And then you start to kind of have to say, where does the rubber meet the road? Do these things really come to fruition? That's where we are now. Expect some churning in this market. And we do think the market will be higher, like I said, but not to the level that we've seen the past couple of years. However, let me just say real quick, guys, this AI announcement, this Stargate component, maybe that's a spark that starts a whole new run here that we weren't expecting this year. We'll see.
Victoria Fernandez with us. She's going to come back. She's got to go out in the driveway with the John Deere and get that thing going. 1895, Houston, 20 inches. 1960, 4 inches. 1949, 3 inches. Fernandez putting up with a 3-inch deluge here this week. Let's get the market open. Lisa Mateo, no snow.
No snow. But it'll be interesting to see if we get things started because it's President Trump's first week back in the White House, nearing an end right now. We'll start with the S&P 500. So we see it. Little change, up about a point at 6,120. Let's get to the Dow. The Dow down about 0.1%, 62 points, 44,506. And finally, off to the NASDAQ, up about 0.1%, 31 points at 20,088. Over to the 2-year yield, 4.28%. Down 1 basis point. The yield on the 10-year, 4.65%, and that is little change. The Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index down about 0.3%. We go to the Japanese yen down about 0.2%, 156.46 against the dollar. We have the euro up about 0.6%, 104.77, and the British pound up about 0.5%. Bitcoin up 2% at just above 105,000. And finally, over to commodities. We have Brent crude at $78 a barrel, up about 0.7%. WTI crude $75 a barrel, and we do have spot gold as well, $2,775 an ounce. That is your Bloomberg opening bell report. Paul and Tom.
Thank you so much, Lisa. How much snow have you shoveled, Lisa? You've been out there in the driveway.
There was one time it was like 12 at once, and then the next day it was like another 12. With a shovel.
We've gone a few years
with a shovel.
Snow, so.
Lake effect in Rochester. That's called a dusting.
A dusting.
We continue with Victoria Fernandez here. Victoria, one of the hallmarks of this lift that we've seen in the market is a lack of exuberance. How do you and Bob Dahl measure the lack of exuberance right now?
Well, you have to look at the optimism that we're seeing with the idea that new policies are coming into place. We talked a few minutes ago about it being business friendly, and people are looking for tax cuts to come, both corporate and individual. So there's a lot of optimism in this marketplace, and you're seeing it in different segments. We think people need to be a little bit more cautious, one, because we don't think the labor market is going to be as strong as a lot of people anticipate. We're concerned about valuations, and we're concerned that the consumer is going to pull back. So we're trying to set expectations to be a little bit more cautious than maybe what a lot of people are saying.
Victoria, we've seen technology be a leader in this market for the longest time. What are some of the other segments that can do well? I think one of the Trump trades was buy financials because, cutting taxes, maybe cutting regulations. How do you think about that?
Yeah, so Paul, we've liked financials for a long time. We like those big banks, strong balance sheets. You've got a yield curve that's looking promising, deregulation coming in, loan growth is increasing. All these things are very positive for the financial industry and especially for big banks. We're a little more cautious on regionals. Their balance sheets aren't quite as strong, but we like the financial sector. We like credit cards. Even though we're seeing some delinquencies start to move a little bit higher, we still think you've got some good areas there. Return on equity is really high, but industrials are leadership too. So you have to look at some names in there, whether it's a CAT or a Deere. With onshoring coming and more CapEx and more projects, infrastructure projects, industrials can do well. And one thing real quick, we mentioned you could see some changes in leadership on a temporary basis as liquidity increases. That means that maybe you look at some of the value stocks as well on a tactical basis over the next few months.
Have you ever been in a Patagonia store, Victoria?
I have not.
See that?
You don't do that.
We live it. Or North Face.
No, please. Well, they go to Aspen, maybe. You go
they
get
had
up to
3 or 4 inches of snow in Houston.
I know.
It's amazing. They showed, there was one scene of the snow right up to the Gulf of America.
Really?
That's what it's called.
There you go.
You know what Houston does
well?
Houston does humidity very well.
Yes. They own the high ground. They do. Victoria, thank you so much. Victoria Fernandez from Houston with Crossmark, and just some really nice wisdom on the courage to be in the market, the elan it takes if you're scared stiff to be in the market. This is a big debate, Gulf of Mexico, Gulf of America.
Yeah.
I once went to Dubai, and I had to sit down with a security type here in New York, and I was lectured on the Persian Gulf, the Arabian Gulf.
Oh, that could be dicey.
Sensitive issue over there. So maybe we're reducing that.
I'm not very good with change, though, so we'll have to see how this goes.
We'll see. I don't have any strong opinion either way. Lisa does.
Love this woman.
Right now, red and green on the screen. The VIX under 15. That's critical for me. 14.95. We say good morning to all of you, particularly this new experiment out on YouTube. Subscribe to Bloomberg Podcasts. From New York City, Bloomberg Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. Well, a nice run for the S&P 500, seeing its best start for a president since 1985. That's going back to Ronald Reagan. The S&P 500 climbing over 2% this week. Right now, checking in with it, it's a little change up about 4 points, but at 6,123. The Dow down about 0.1%, 40 points, but at 44,524. And the NASDAQ, little changed, up 17 at 20,071. We have the 2-year yield, 4.28%. That's down 1 basis point, and the yield on the 10-year 4.65%, and that is little change. The dollar fell to a 1-month low. It's set for its biggest weekly slide since November 2023. We'll get to the Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index down about 0.3%. I want to go to shares of railroad company CSX. They're down about nearly 3%. It said revenue fell last quarter for CSX, hit by lower fuel surcharge, also that coal revenue on top of it. We did have a lift to luxury, though. Burberry shares up 12% in London, just about. Better than expected sales thanks to U.S. shoppers, and that's giving a boost to companies like Gucci-owned Kering up almost 4%. LVMH in Paris up more than 1%. Even Richemont up nearly 1%. And a look ahead to tech earnings next week comes after Mark Zuckerberg said Meta planning to invest $60 to $65 billion in CapEx this year, higher than expected. So you have Meta shares up more than 1%. We look at Microsoft down about 0.5%, Tesla up 1%, and Apple shares up about 0.5%. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and Tom.
Thanks so much. I greatly appreciate it. I asked a number of days ago within her busy schedule to get Angela Stent on. Her book on Putin was my book of the year a Ukraine ago. I don't know, it was February of that year and Putin invaded, and I said, get Angela Stent. And we do that again today. There's a lot of naivete out there, Dr. Stent. There's no question about that. If President Trump meets with Mr. Putin, who will he meet with?
That's a great question. Good morning, everyone. So Putin has suddenly begun to change his tune. He said he's willing to discuss arms control. He said that today, which the Russians have refused to do for the last few years. I think he really wants to meet with President Trump because that would show that the West can't isolate him anymore, and it would sort of shore up his domestic and international legitimacy. But I don't think he's really interested in ending this war anytime soon because he thinks he's winning. So he'd like to meet with President Trump, and I think he would be willing to start some kind of negotiations. But his people have so far rejected all the terms that General Kellogg, who's President Trump's envoy, has mentioned, and what President Trump himself has said. Yeah.
So realistically, Angela, what do you think President Trump can get done vis-a-vis the Ukraine, and under which time period?
So, I mean, the time period is very vague. He was unable to stop the war in 24 hours. Now he's talking about 6 months. He really has to have enough leverage to force Putin to the table and to agree at least to a ceasefire and then negotiations. And we saw yesterday at Davos that he threatened sanctions again, and the day before, and tariffs and things like that if Russia didn't come to the table. I think we have to see how much leverage he really has.
I look, Angela Stent, at Mr. Putin and the unknowns of Putin, and you've been wonderful about providing clarity there. And in the recent days, we've done China interviews where the Chinese in Beijing separate foreign discussions from domestic discussions. Is it the same for Putin in Moscow? Does he separate the collapse of the Russian economy from foreign policy discussions, or is it more like America?
So, I mean, he tends to separate everything. But I think in this case, another thing that President Trump has said is that if the Russians appear willing to negotiate, then he might provide sanctions relief. So I think Putin would be looking for sanctions relief, even though he denies publicly that his economy is in trouble. We know that it is. So I would expect to see that if the negotiations happen and if discussions proceed, in a fairly productive way.
Angela, what do we know about Putin's support within Russia itself, the popular support? What do we know about that?
So as far as we know, from the one remaining independent pollster, he still has the public support for this war. Okay. But more than 50% of the Russians now say there should be negotiations, but they also say we should not give up any of the territory that we've taken in Ukraine. So far, his popularity is quite strong. If the economy really gets much worse and people feel the pinch, then that could change.
Does he want to, is it just as simple as Angela Stent that Mr. Putin wants to Crimea eastern Ukraine?
I mean, he wants Crimea, he wants eastern Ukraine, but he wants much more than that. He wants to sit down with President Trump and really do another Yalta. In other words, get the United States to agree that Russia has a right to a sphere of influence, not only in the post-Soviet states like Ukraine, but even in the former Warsaw Pact states. He's been explicit about that. That's what he wants. He ultimately wants a grand bargain.
This is absolutely brilliant. We could extend this interview out 3 hours and have a beverage like Winston Churchill in Yalta a few years ago. Come on, Angela Stent. What I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, a wise one, Finland, NATO, Sweden, NATO, Is it Bulgaria NATO? I can't remember. Some other nation.
Bulgaria's in NATO.
Okay,
yeah.
thank you.
All those countries, the former Warsaw Pact countries, are in NATO. So one of the demands he made before he invaded Ukraine was that NATO should roll back to where it was before the Poles and the others joined in 1999. That's what he wants.
Angela Stent with us. The book is Putin's World. It's somewhat dated. We're begging her to get out something new. Absolutely spectacular book. It was my book of the year.
New World is the next book, right?
Yeah. Well, we got to get it out here, and the movie rights. It really, who should play Putin is a huge issue.
Yeah, exactly.
Stent and Jurgen were weighing in on that.
Exactly.
But, it's not DiCaprio.
No, exactly. Angela Stent, your former colleague Admiral James Stavridis, and he's also a Bloomberg opinion columnist. He's out with an opinion column today talking about Panama and suggesting that the Panama attack would be dumb and difficult. What do you think President Trump's strategy is vis-a-vis Panama? How do you think that should play out?
Well, I'm no expert on Panama, but I think he genuinely wants to take it back. I think he's concerned about what the Chinese are doing there. Obviously, the Panamanians are going to resist this. And, in the end, he may have to offer them money to do this. I can't imagine that there's going to be any military action there, but you just don't know with him. Same goes for Greenland. But the Russians are looking at this and saying, if he does this, what's the difference between what he wants to do and what we've done in Ukraine?
I got one final answer. We're on with the head of the central bank in Denmark today, Dr. Stent. I look at the eastern shore of Greenland, which I think is north of Iceland, and basically it's on the guardrail of Mr. Putin's Navy's highway from the Barents Sea to the North Atlantic, from Murmansk, rather, down to the North Atlantic. What is Russia going to do if they got the eastern Greenland shore a massive United States naval port?
Well, they've already started complaining about that. I guess they, build up their own naval investments there. But I think that they are watching this carefully, and they, at the moment they're rather hobbled because of the Ukraine war. If that were over, then they might take robust action. Yeah.
Dr. Stent, thank you so much. Love the energy. Thank you. Angela Stent, Putin's World's iconic. Look for her next book out. Really an honor to have her on with us today. Paul, we got to do this, and we're waiting for Matt Winkler. We're talking to his people, and we hope to get him in here. But I remember talking to Paul Hondros, who basically ran Fidelity for Mr. Johnson. And Abby Johnson runs Fidelity now. And he said, Tom, we're doing these select funds. And, younger people don't understand how absolutely legendary and revolutionary the Fidelity Select funds were when they came out.
Select healthcare, select energy.
It was a changing of the landscape. Do you remember the pushback? How dare you go into select funds?
Yeah, the whole thing about being in a mutual fund was a diversification that it would allow you. So going into these select funds, which again would focus on an industry vertical or a factor vertical, whether be an industry like healthcare or energy. So again, Fidelity. Now the question, Tom, is for the Fidelities of the world and the mutual fund industry of the world, ETFs.
You got it.
They're taking over the world. It is the new wrapper for investors to get access to all kinds of financial assets, and at lower cost, better transparency, tax advantages, all the things we hear about from the Eric Balchunas of the world. But what does that mean for Fidelity, T. Rowe Price, the big mutual fund complexes? I don't know.
And there seems to be a huge adjustment here after the BlackRock earnings report. The pros I talked to were stunned at the ability to bring in money by BlackRock. And then, do we see a lot more mergers, and not Fidelity, but do we see bundles up in mergers this year?
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. Eric Balchunas, he'll say the reason the mutual fund companies aren't panicking at the moment is because the stock market's been going up, so their total assets under management, even though there are outflows from mutual funds to ETFs, the absolute amount of their assets is still very healthy because the underlying assets are
one of the brilliances of January is Matt Winkler. Matt takes 6 weeks vacation.
Why not?
All his team is doing the work.
He's earned it.
But the answer is he comes out every year and says, shut up and listen to about a fund manager who actually gets it done. Now, I don't want to turn this into a geek fest. Matt will put me in the timeout chair. But our emeritus editor-in-chief is a guy with a 3-year and 5-year Sharpe ratio I've never seen. He's 97th percentile. Am I right, Shinpei? Am I getting the math right? Yeah. He's 97th percentile across any kind of comparison. And Matt, the heart of Adam Benjamin at Fidelity is you don't buy semiconductors for a 6-month period. They can be a long-term investment, and it's been unreal.
Always good to be with you. Thank you. So Adam Benjamin, yes, he's been at it for almost 25 years, and he is in charge of the Fidelity Select Semiconductor Fund, which he's been managing since 2020. And in 3 of the past 4 years, it's been the #1 fund based on our criteria at Bloomberg, which is at least $5 billion of assets invested over 5 years, 60% in the U.S. Yeah. And he has brought to his profession a great deal of study, research, not to mention the fact that he says he gets up at 4 a.m. Every day and does.
I never did that.
And does one of these.
I used to slide in at John Tucker. You're looking at me. I used to slide in at 9:45. Redo and Matt are going. What are you? Get in here at 5 a.m.
Yeah, but what he does at 4 a.m. is he literally looks at everything that he owns in this fund and says, "Is this what I would do right now? Is this the weighting that I would have right now?" And that kind of rigor informs, if you like, his experience and also his outcomes.
Well, he runs the Select Semiconductor Portfolio Mutual Fund. I could put up 49% returns over the last few years. I mean, 2022, the market gets crushed. He gets crushed. But it's the AI trade, right? And he's just riding this AI trade, it seems like.
Well, that is true, although, he's kind of the first, if you will, to perceive the trend in its making, and also brings that knowledge in a way that, even an index fund that essentially has what you would call the elements of the semiconductor industry globally, he manages to do better than that cohort. And the reason why he does better is because he's been doing it for quite a long time, and he takes it very seriously, and he brings his research to it. And give you an example, by the way, this year, he's a repeat winner. So last year, comes on the top of being #1 in 23. And in #1 in 23, he was up against #2, which was an exchange-traded fund. So there's your example. Yet in 24, last year, that #2 is down to #7. And the reason why it fell to #7 is because Adam Benjamin did some things that the index fund couldn't possibly replicate. And these are qualitative decisions on his part. For example, he didn't include Intel at all in his holding. And that enabled him to increase the performance.
My hallmark on this, going back to Fidelity, is they let their winners run. This is Peter Lynch 101. And if you own NVIDIA or you own that, a lot of other people are trading in and out. And the Will Danoff way, learn from Mr. Lynch, is to just, is there a reason to sell this thing? And the answer is no. Their portfolio turnover rate is a little off the mark. I need to do an audible on Matt Winkler. One night, I'm in Boston. I'm depressed. The Red Sox are losing. I'm on the couch, and at 2 in the morning, I'm watching C-SPAN, and this guy in a bow tie has got his bow tie spinning in front of Congress on Reg FD. The world's turned upside down. An article just the last week or so on the death of securities analysis. And you've been railing about this for years. Do we need 30 opinions on Intel Do we need 45 opinions on NVIDIA?
Oh, Tom, I'm not qualified to give you that kind of an answer. I'm just a newsman. I just report, what I see and hear.
His chops.
Yeah.
But Reg FD revolution.
Reg FD was really important. And the reason was, what that was about was what we call selective disclosure, is that, companies routinely during the 90s would get their best customers together in any kind of setting, close the door, and reward their best customers with the insight that next quarter is going to be a terrific one.
I mean, Paul, you live this.
And we Bloomberg News in our infancy would document these sudden price fluctuations in the market, and the spokesman for the company would say, we know no reason why, the stock had its biggest advance in 3 years. And of course, we would then, investigate it further and find out, well, there was, this meeting at the Phoenicia Hotel.
No.
And the doors were
Paul,
closed.
would you like to provide some clarity on this?
And we wrote about it. And of course, the companies didn't like it because, it was awkward for them, of course. But we kept doing it, and we actually created a function on the Bloomberg called NI, news category was NI Hush, and it was the bucket for all the selective disclosure examples, of which there were
Paul, you lived this. What was it?
Thousands.
Like? Paul, what was it like?
My best
Reg FD.
That was all true, and I worked my whole career to build those relationships up. So I would get that phone call from management, which I did. The best one was when they called you into a private equity firm's office on a Sunday night, saying, "Hey, if we were to buy this company tomorrow, announce it at 8:30 in the morning, how do you think the market would react?" How about that? That was
So I got to tell you. So we finally persuaded the SEC under Arthur Levitt to consider this whole issue, which he did to his everlasting credit. And I guess it was a 3-2 vote at the turn of the century. We got Reg FD.
I can tell you, Matt, this is long before I had the privilege of walking in the door here. The day after Reg FD, my world changed. For people that don't understand this, Paul, it was abrupt. Yeah. The general counsels had more weight at these companies than anybody else.
Then Elliot Spitzer came along with a nail in the coffin.
Yeah.
Here I am at Bloomberg.
Matt, thank you so much. On Adam Benjamin at Fidelity, we say good morning, 99 FM in Boston on this. It's absolutely spectacular, and the math is behind us. I mean, Matt doesn't do the math. Shanpei does the math. Sure. But the 3-year and 5-year Sharpe ratios, which is inside global Wall Street baseball, I have never seen. I can honestly say I've never seen that delivered on semiconductors with Adam Benjamin. Matthew Winkler, thank you so much. Emeritus Editor-in-Chief. Full disclosure, he's the one that said, Tom, why don't you come in the door and say on radio with Lisa Mateo? I said, sure, man, I can do that. So, Matt, say happy birthday to Lisa. It's her birthday today. We're celebrating. Red and green on the screen. Winkler lifting the market fractionally. NASDAQ up 22 points. The VIX 14.8. 0. So, we look at Lisa's birthday and, if we'd all gone to Davos, she and I would have been at the piano bar. And Rachel from West Lafayette, Indiana, emailed in and said, there's only one song you can play for Lisa. I mean, you got to do it. It's like 1 a.m, Barry's at the piano bar. Mm-hmm. Thursday night's the busiest night.
Is it? Okay.
And Lisa would be right up there with Rachel at the piano, singing Neil Diamond.
Wow.
Neil's 84 today.
He is.
And he's still popping. Sweet Caroline. Happy birthday from all of us to Lisa Mateo.